All right, this round is good to go. You can begin. Thank you.
All right, plaintiff, are you ready to proceed? Are there any pretrial matters?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay. Would you like to make introductions for the court? I'm sorry, Mr. Johnson, we cannot hear you. No, I'm still having trouble hearing you.
Can you hear me now, Your Honor? Thank you. I'm really sorry about that.
Right.
Before I begin, I'd like to make introductions, if that's all right.
Yes, sir.
I am Gabe Johnson.
Hello, I'm Taryn Scott.
And Sarah Quinlivan.
Good morning, Your Honor.
Good morning.
And we will be representing the estate of Genesis Petrillo.
Defense introductions?
Yes, Your Honor. Good morning. My name is Danny Wassell, along with my co-counselors, Miss Emily O'Keefe.
Good morning, Your Honor.
And Mr. Krish Katari.
Good morning, Your Honor.
And together we will be representing the defendant in today's case, Ms. Harper Martini.
Good morning, Your Honor.
Good morning, everybody. Plaintiff, do you have any pretrial matters to attend to?
Yes, Your Honor, just a few.
All right.
Firstly, we'd like to ask for permission to show the exhibits of evidence by sharing our screens.
Yes, you may. I wanted to let both teams know that I had some technical issues with Zoom on my computer this morning, so I am in fact streaming through my phone. So what that means is when you guys share like you normally do, but just let me know what you're putting up, and it might take me an extra 30 seconds or so to pull up the case file on my computer so that I can follow along with you guys. So just add like an extra 10-second pause once you pull it up before you continue so I can make sure to follow along. But yes, you may. Just make sure you don't have to ask permission to share anything with the judges, but when you want to constructively share it with the jury, please ask permission.
Okay, Your Honor, we will. Secondly, we'd like to point your attention to stipulation 3, which states that exhibits 1 through 10 are pre-admitted at evidence.
Any objection to those being admitted at this point from the defense?
No objection, Your Honor.
All right, so exhibits 1 through 10 are admitted without objection. Please just make sure to remind me when you're pulling them up whether or not the exhibit being pulled up has been entered into evidence or not so that I can keep track of that.
No problem, Your Honor. Finally, we'd like to invoke Rule 615 and constructively sequester all witnesses except for party representatives.
And who is your party representative?
Well, we're the estate of Genesis Petrillo.
Okay, you don't have anybody sitting in for her, excuse me.
No, Your Honor, Genesis Petrillo is deceased.
Okay, so no family members or anything that you want as the party representative?
No witnesses, Your Honor, no.
All right, defense, do you have a party representative?
Yes, Your Honor. Ms. Harper Martini.
All right, everyone will be sequestered constructively except for Harper Martini. Anything else, plaintiff?
No, Your Honor, that's it. Thank you.
All right, any pretrial matters from the defense?
Yes, Your Honor. We would also like to invoke Rule 615. Well, we already established that Ms. Harper Martini is our party representative, but also Rule 603, which is constructive pre-swearing of all witnesses prior to today's trial. And I would also like to bring your attention to some relevant case law in today's case, specifically Burdett v. Copenhaver, which is found on page 1 of the case law document. It outlines the 3 elements of civil battery in today's case. I would also like to direct your attention to Eaton v. Parlett, which outlines that plaintiff may prove intent in a civil battery case in only one of 2 ways. either the defendant acted with the purpose of producing a consequence, or the defendant acted knowingly that the consequence was substantially likely to result. Additionally, I just want to make sure that you have case materials such as the rules of evidence, case law, and stipulations with you.
I do. I have all of those.
Okay, excellent. And with that, the defense is ready to proceed with opening statements.
All right. Before I take notice of the case law as Ms. Wissell explained it, plaintiff, do you have any objection to her characterization of those pieces of case law?
No, Your Honor.
All right. So the court will take notice in the way that Ms. Wissell just explained it. I will also allow the pre-swearing of all witnesses. And if there's anything else that either team would like to talk about before we begin?
No, Your Honor.
No, Your
All
Honor.
right. Plaintiff has the floor.
Good morning, Your Honor. Permission to adjust my computer?
You may, and if any of you guys need to adjust anything or are having any technical issues, feel free to just ask for a moment from the court and I will grant that.
Yes, Your Honor. May I have just one moment, please?
You may, and you can start whenever you're ready. You don't need to ask at this point.
Okay.
Oh, shit.
I'm about to. Why is this taking so long?
Sure, Michael.
May it please the court, Your Honor, opposing counsel, members of the jury. Today you're going to hear about a young woman, Genesis Petrillo, who died the day of her wedding. Now the defendant, Harper Martini, cares about two things: her business and her only child, Casey. And you will see that a mother's love knows no bounds. It's 2019. Genesis and Casey have been dating for 6 years. Genesis just finished graduate school. She is loving and she is supportive of Casey. But you'll also hear that there were problems. Genesis was planning to take Casey across the world and away from the defendant. The couple do not expect the happiest day of their life to tragically plunder. Tragic because a mother's love knows no bounds. It's June 7th, 2019, the night of the rehearsal dinner. Everything is planned from the flavor of cake to when they would say, I do. Today you will hear that on the night of the rehearsal dinner, the defendant gave Genesis a bottle of Carl wine. Genesis drank that wine and then died hours later, around 9:27 a.m., her wedding day. As the plaintiff, we will prove by the preponderance of the evidence that the defendant poisoned Genesis Petrillo, and the poisoned caused death. But we'll also tell you why. And it's because a mother's love knows no bounds. Today you will hear from 3 witnesses. First, you will hear from Angel Rodriguez, a friend of Casey and Genesis, who was at the rehearsal dinner and the hospital when Genesis died hours later. You will hear that Miss Rodriguez saw the defendant carrying pesticide on the night of the rehearsal dinner. And she will tell you that she saw Genesis drink from the bottle of Carol wine given to her by the defendant. Second, you will know from Dr. Jamin Kwan, Chief Emergency Physician at River Valley Hospital here in Midlands. Dr. Kwan examined Genesis the night she was poisoned by pesticide. And Dr. Kwan will conclude that Genesis in fact died from organophosphates. Finally, you will hear from Danny Francasio, the defendant's previous employer and former confidant. Ms. Francasio will tell you that the defendant knew pesticides were dangerous and could hurt people. Ms. Francasio will also discuss how the defendant despised Genesis. By the end of today's trial, you will see that a mother's love knows no bounds, and therefore the defendant poisoned Genesis Petrillo. My co-counsel, Sarah Quinn Levin, and I will ask you to find the defendant liable of battery. Thank you.
Thank you. Does defense have an opening statement?
Yes, Your Honor. Permission to proceed?
You may. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Your Honor, opposing counsel, members of the jury, may it please the court. Accidents happen. Members of the jury, today, my co-counsel and I are going to tell you about the relationship between a mother and a son, as well as a relationship between that mother and her soon-to-be daughter-in-law. Genesis Petrillo and Casey Soto were inseparable from the moment they met. They loved each other very much. Now, Casey's mother, Harper Martini, struggled to understand their bond, but she was still willing to better her relationship with Genesis because she loved Casey. However, when events took a turn for the worse, accusations were made. On June 8th, 2019, Genesis Petrillo passed away due to suspected pesticide poisoning, and Harper Martini was the one blamed for it. Members of the jury, today my co-counsel and I are going to tell you about how the tension between Mrs. Martini and Genesis Petrillo was turned into a horrid accusation. The evidence in today's case will show you that although Mrs. Martini wasn't fond of her son's significant other, she wasn't seeking to intentionally harm them. She did, however, have difficulty controlling pests and properly storing pesticides in the midst of planning a wedding. Mrs. Martini's winery, Peony Estates, is located near a swamp. Therefore, she often has significant trouble ensuring that there are no pests near the wine. Peony Estates was also the location where the wedding was to be housed. Unfortunately, extreme measures had to be taken to ensure that there was no pests near the wine, and the effects were felt the night of the rehearsal dinner. We are not here today because Mrs. Martini intentionally sought to harm Genesis Petrillo. We are here today because she was careless. Now, in order to determine that Mrs. Martini is liable for civil battery, the plaintiff has a lot to prove. But today we are going to call 3 witnesses in order to show you why they won't be able to prove this. First, you will hear from Harper Martini herself, who will reveal to you not only her passion for her business, but for Casey, her only child. You will learn that Mrs. Martini cared so strongly for Peony Estates and for her relationship with her son that there is no way she would purposely jeopardize either of them. Next, you will hear from Dr. Cannon. Dr. Cannon is an expert in the field of toxicology with a number of notable publications. Dr. Cannon will provide the facts about where the pesticide could have been picked up. She will reveal that although the wine bottle tested positive for pesticides, Genesis could have ingested these pesticides from a number of other sources. Finally, you will hear from Sam Arnold, the wedding caterer. Mrs. Arnold will share that Mrs. Martini's disregard for safety measures placed pesticides in places they shouldn't have been, revealing to the jury that accidents do happen. As the defense, we bear no burden in today's case. That burden lies solely on the plaintiff. The plaintiff must prove that Harper Martini is liable for battery by a preponderance of the evidence. Members of the jury, this is not nearly as simple as they are making it out to be. In order to prove civil battery, 3 elements must be met. The first, that Mrs. Martini committed an act. The second, that the act was intended to cause offensive or harmful contact. And finally, that the plaintiff was in fact harmed. Today, I am confident that opposing counsel will not be able to prove that Mrs. Martini intended to harm Genesis Petrillo because what happened on June 7th was tragic, but it was merely an accident. And my client did not intentionally seek to harm Genesis Petrillo. At the end of today's trial, my co-counselor, Krish Katari, will come before you and ask you to find Harper Martini not liable for civil battery because accidents happen. Thank you.
Thank you. Plaintiff, are you ready to begin your case in chief?
Yes, Your Honor. May I have one moment, please?
You may.
All right, Your Honor, the plaintiff calls Angel Rodriguez to the stand.
All right, welcome. Angel Rodriguez, you have been sworn. Plaintiff, you may begin your direct examination whenever you're ready.
Please state your name for the members of the jury.
Good morning. My name is Angel Rodriguez.
What do you do for a living?
I am a kindergarten teacher at Rapid River Valley Elementary School in Rapid River Valley, Midlands.
When you're not teaching, what do you do on your free time?
Oh, I like to garden. I also like history a lot. I even have a trivia team, which I'm on, which I like to go down to the local bar with my friends.
Who's on your trivia team?
There's Drew Matsukos. He's our science guy. I'm your token history buff. There's Casey. She does the sports. And there's also Genesis, and they do arts and literature. And together we are an unstoppable team.
What is your relationship like with Casey, Genesis, and Drew?
Well, they're my very best friends. I would do anything for them. When I found out that Casey and Genesis were getting married, I was ecstatic.
Were you part of the wedding?
Yes, they invited me to be a part of their wedding party, which was amazing. I even got to help them plan the wedding, which was to be at Rosie and Pedro's.
Now, Miss Rodriguez, do you know the defendant in today's case, Harper Martini?
Yes, they're Casey's mom.
And what is your relationship like with Harper?
I didn't know Harper too well at the beginning, but I got to know them better through the wedding planning process when Harper was added to our party and the wedding plans all changed.
What do you mean when you say the wedding plans all changed?
With the addition of Harper to our wedding party, the venue was changed from Rosie and Pedro's to Harper's business, which is Peony Estates. She also brought in a wedding planner, even though we had already planned out the wedding, and Casey and Genesis liked it fine the way it was.
I'd like to talk about the wedding, specifically the dinner rehearsal the night before on June 7th, 2019. How did this dinner start?
It was not good. There was nonstop fighting between Harper and Genesis. At one point, I even saw Harper say to Genesis that they should leave and save this family the headache. Otherwise, I will make you disappear. Pretty
What
harsh
happened?
just do an in-law.
happened after this was said?
Genesis was understandably upset and went to confront Harper about it. And I saw Harper roughly grab Genesis's arm and pull them into the hallway.
You know what happened in the hallway?
I didn't see exactly what happened in the hallway, no. But when Genesis came back, they looked pretty shaken up.
Now, did you see Harper at any point throughout the night again?
I did, yes. About an hour before dinner, I saw Harper walking towards the direction of the kitchen with a can that appeared to be labeled pesticide, which is kind of odd. And I asked her what she was doing with it.
What did Harper say?
She said it's for Genesis because Genesis is such a pest.
Now, did the relationship between Harper and Genesis change at any point throughout the night?
Interestingly enough, it did. At around 10 p.m. that night, Harper presented Genesis with a beautiful bottle of pear wine and a toast. She surprised us all, given what we had experienced and seen before.
And why did the bottle of Cara wine surprise you?
Because the rest of us got a variety called Horizon.
Did you ever see Genesis drink from this bottle of Cara wine?
Oh, yes. Genesis was so relieved by the gesture and promptly began pouring glassfuls of the wine and offered it to the rest of us like the kind soul she is.
Did any of you guys drink the wine that Genesis offered you?
I had a sip, but I spit it out without swallowing because that was the worst wine that I've ever tasted. And I've tasted a lot of wine.
At around 11 p.m. that night, and you guys were done drinking, what happened?
After we were done drinking, Genesis started not acting like herself. She was starting to sway and had a total lack of coordination, it seemed. I was really concerned about Genesis, and so I asked her if she wanted to go up to bed, and she said no, but I decided it was in her best interest to do so, so I took her up to bed.
What happened after you took Genesis up to bed?
That's where things got worse. As soon as we got to Genesis's bedroom, Genesis started sweating and vomiting profusely. They couldn't even swallow a sip of water without spitting it out immediately. It was incredibly scary. I kept asking what I could do to help, but Genesis was not able to speak, and the last thing Genesis said to me was to call 911.
Did you call 911, Miss Rodriguez?
Of course I did. Once the paramedics got there, they performed CPR on Genesis and took him out on a stretcher.
Go to the hospital with Genesis?
Yes, I didn't want to leave Genesis's side that night. They looked to be in pretty bad shape, and I would never leave a friend in need.
What happened when you got to the hospital?
I stayed all night with Genesis. At around 8 a.m., I found out that Genesis was in some sort of coma. At that point, I knew I needed to go to Casey and tell Casey what had happened. And so I rushed back to Peony Estates to go get Casey.
You and Casey go back to the hospital?
Yes, we rushed back as fast as we could. But when we got there, we found out that Genesis had only died moments before. It was the saddest day of my life.
Miss Rodriguez, did you tell anyone else but Casey about what had happened to Genesis?
No, of course I didn't. I ran into Harper in the hallway, but before I could say anything, Harper said that, "Oh no, Genesis got poisoned. Go tell Casey. Casey needs to know." But I hadn't told anyone.
Sorry, you cut out. Can you re-say your answer?
Yes, are you able to repeat the question one more time, please?
Oh yeah. Did you tell anyone else about what had happened to Genesis that night?
No, that was the interesting part. I ran into Harper in the hallway, and before I could say anything, Harper said, "Oh no, Genesis got poisoned. Go tell Casey. Casey needs to know." But I hadn't told anyone.
Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions at this time.
Cross exam?
Yes, Your Honor. So, Mrs. Rodriguez, you said that you were close with Genesis and Casey, correct?
Yes, they were my best friends.
And you were present when they announced their engagement.
I was.
However, you noticed that after this announcement, things between Genesis and Harper seemed to get pretty tense.
Yes.
And you didn't know Harper very well prior to them getting involved in the wedding planning.
Yes.
And you never thought that that Harper hated Genesis, correct?
I mean, I would definitely say that Harper had a very, very, very strong disliking to Genesis, and specifically made efforts to make Genesis feel unwelcome in the family.
Redirecting you back to my question, Mrs. Rodriguez, you would never say that Harper hated Genesis, correct?
I would say Harper hated Genesis.
All right, I want to talk about the night of the wedding rehearsal. So you were present on June 7th at the wedding rehearsal, correct?
Yes, I was.
And you would agree that Mrs. Martini gave two toasts that evening.
Yes.
And in her second toast, Mrs. Martini attempted to make amends with Genesis, correct?
I'm not sure if she was making amends, but she certainly did offer a toast to Genesis.
And in this second toast, Harper then gifted Genesis a bottle of Cara wine, correct?
Yes.
And you also accepted a glass of this Cara wine.
Yes, I did.
And you were also the only other person besides Genesis to have accepted a glass of this wine.
I did accept it, yes, but I did not swallow any of the wine.
But you did put a sip of the glass in your mouth, correct?
Yes, but I did not swallow the wine. I spit it out because that was the worst wine I've ever tasted.
However, you didn't experience any pesticide-related symptoms, correct?
What would you mean by pesticide-related symptoms?
Any of the symptoms that Genesis Petrillo had after consuming this wine.
Could you go into more depth, please?
You explained in your direct that Genesis was sweating and vomiting. You didn't experience any of these types of symptoms after having had this wine in your mouth, correct?
No, I didn't swallow any of the wine, and I was fortunate enough not to experience any symptoms that night.
And you would also agree that Genesis was drinking quite a lot this evening.
Yeah, Genesis had a ton of that Cara wine.
And around 10:45, you first noticed Genesis acting different.
Yes.
And this was a type of different that you had never seen Genesis acting before.
Yes, I've seen Genesis drink many times before, and they've never acted like this, ever.
And you watched as Genesis began vomiting and sweating profusely, correct?
Yes.
Genesis wasn't even able to drink any water without throwing it up directly afterwards.
Yes.
However, you didn't call 911 until around 12:42, roughly 2 hours after noticing this first initial difference in Genesis's behavior.
So Genesis didn't begin throwing up until later in the night, but I did call 911 when Genesis asked me to. I wasn't sure how bad off they were.
You do realize that your delay to call 911 after initially realizing that Genesis was acting differently could have negatively affected their state, correct?
Why would I? I mean, I was focused in the moment of trying to take care of Genesis. I didn't know what to do.
And you also held off from contacting Casey about Genesis's state, correct?
Yes, Casey had a lot on her plate from the wedding, and she was super stressed. I didn't want to bother her with anything else.
So, Mrs. Rodriguez, you waited until Genesis slipped into a coma before you thought to notify their soon-to-be husband?
Well, I found out that Genesis was in a coma, yes, and I knew I had to get Casey. I was hoping Genesis would turn around in time for the wedding. I didn't know how bad off Genesis was.
And you would also agree that after Genesis's death, your and Casey's relationship has worsened.
What would you mean by worsened?
It's just become more of a tense relationship between the two of you.
Yeah, we do have a little bit of a disagreement.
And since their death, you have dedicated a significant amount of time to bring justice to Genesis.
Of course, what happened to Genesis was a tragedy.
And by bringing about this justice, you have blamed Harper Martini for poisoning Genesis Petrillo, correct?
Yes.
I want to ask you a couple questions about Peony Estates itself. So you aren't familiar with where Peony Estates houses their pesticides, correct?
No, I would definitely not know that.
And you never saw Mrs. Martini put pesticides in the wine, correct?
No, I didn't follow Harper Martini to the kitchen.
In fact, you never even saw pesticides near the bottle of wine, correct?
No, as I didn't follow Harper. I'm no stalker. I didn't see.
Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions.
Any redirect from the plaintiff?
Briefly, Your Honor.
You have the floor.
Ms. Rodriguez, you mentioned in the cross-examination that Genesis Petrillo drank a lot that night. Did you see Genesis drink anything else but the Cara wine?
No, I did not.
Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions at this time.
Any recross on that point?
No, Your Honor.
All right. Thank you for your time, Ms. Rodriguez. You are excused. Does plaintiff have another witness to call?
Yes, Your Honor. The plaintiffs would like to call Dr. Jim and Kwan.
All right. Thank you for being here today, Dr. Kwan. Plaintiff, you have the floor.
Before I begin, I'd just like to ensure that everybody can hear and see me clearly. Okay, thank you. Good morning. Please introduce yourself to the court.
Hello, my name is Dr. Jimin Kwan.
Dr. Kwan, what do you do for a living?
I am Chief Emergency Physician at Rapid River Valley Hospital here in Midlands.
What do your duties as Chief Emergency Physician include?
Well, it's my job to quickly and accurately diagnose patients, as well as my team of doctors and nurses. We order tests and make diagnosis. As well, any suspected toxins and poisoning cases, I'm usually assigned.
Okay, doctor. Before we get into the facts about Ms. Petrillo, I'd like to talk about you and your background a little bit. Where did you go to school?
I got my undergraduate degree in chemistry from the Georgia Institute of Technology. I got my doctorate from UNC Chapel Hill and then completed my residency at Emory University.
Did you specialize in any specific kind of medicine?
Yeah, so part of my time spent at Emory was specializing in toxicology. In that sphere, I'm a published author and an established member of the toxicology community.
Okay, doctor. Now I'd like to talk about Ms. Petrillo. How did you first meet her?
Objection, Your Honor. There's a lack of foundation under Rule 702. They haven't been able to establish a reliable method or that they applied a method to the case.
May I respond?
You may.
702 is not yet relevant, as I've not asked the witness to make any conclusion at all. I've just asked him how he met Ms. Petrillo. He doesn't need a foundation to talk about how he first met her.
Can I do another objection then?
Yeah, give me 1 second. Plaintiff, what is your name? I don't believe you are Terrence Scott, correct?
Oh, yeah, I apologize. I'm on my co-counsel's computer because
Yeah, I just want to write your name down so I know what to refer to you as.
I'm Gabe Johnson.
All right, thank you. Mr. Cathari, you may make another objection.
And what's the relevance of that either?
May I respond on relevance grounds?
Briefly.
How the treating physician met his patient is extremely relevant. We're here to talk about the death of Genesis Petrillo, and the doctor's talking about how he met her.
Yeah, I'm going to overrule those objections, but Mr. Cathari, you are correct that certain prongs of 702 have not been spoken about yet. If Mr. Johnson starts to go into conclusions with this witness before he lays those, you may re-object under those grounds.
Yeah, sure. Okay, doctor, I'll re-ask you the question. How did you first meet Genesis Petrillo?
Ms. Petrillo was brought into the ER one night along with her friend, Ms. Rodriguez.
Did you observe any symptoms of Ms. Petrillo when you first met her?
Yes, I did. So when Ms. Petrillo was first brought into the ER, I noticed that she was sweating excessively, that her speech was slurred, and her mobility was impaired to the point that we had to put her in a wheelchair.
Okay, doctor. Now, without telling us what your first diagnosis of her was, did you have enough information to make an initial diagnosis?
I did. With the symptoms I observed and what Ms. Rodriguez had told me that they had been out drinking that night and that Genesis' condition had deteriorated to the point that they felt that they needed to call an ambulance. I did have enough to make a first diagnosis.
What method did you use to make your first diagnosis?
It's a process we're called in school called differential diagnosis.
Can you explain that process just a little bit?
Of course. It's a process where as we observe more symptoms in a patient, we can rule out some diagnosis while ruling in others.
Is this the industry standard?
It is.
Do other doctors that you know also use this method?
Almost every single doctor I know uses this method.
Okay, doctor. So what was your initial diagnosis of Ms. Petrillo?
Objection, Your Honor. Under Rule 702, they haven't established prong D that they applied this method to this case.
May I respond, Your Honor?
Briefly.
The witness just testified about differential diagnosis, how he used it, and how it's accepted by other members in the medical field.
May I respond?
May I finish?
Yeah, I know that there's a little bit of a delay with all the cameras going on top of each other. So if there are instances where people start to talk over each other, I do just ask patience from everybody. We'll figure this out as we go. Mr. Scott, go ahead and finish, and then sorry, I was staring at the Mr. Johnson. Go ahead and finish, and then Mr. Cathari, I'll allow you a brief response.
Yes, Your Honor. The witness just testified about what a differential diagnosis is, how he used it, and how all the other doctors he knows also use it. This is the method he used, and he's explained how he reasonably applied it to this case.
Well, Your Honor, yes, he did explain that there is a method to actually diagnose the patients and that other doctors use it, but he never actually established or said anything along the lines of him applying it to this case specifically.
All right, Mr. Johnson, just ask one more question so that we can satisfy Mr. Cathari of those prongs, and then we can continue forward.
Yeah, sure. Dr. Kwan, did you apply a differential diagnosis to this case?
Yes, I did.
Did you do so reliably and reasonably?
I did.
Okay, doctor. What was your initial diagnosis of Ms. Petrillo?
Well, based on the symptoms I observed, the report I got from Ms. Rodriguez, it was my first diagnosis that Ms. Petrillo was suffering from alcohol poisoning.
After you made that diagnosis, what did you do?
Well, we admitted her into the hospital, and that gave us the ability to run a more thorough examination and take some tests on her.
Doctor, was there anything in your more thorough examination that you saw that you may have overlooked in your first examination?
Yes, so it was at this time, Genesis, who was suffering quite a lot. She could barely speak. She pulled my shirt and pulled me close, and she told me that she was feeling stomach cramps and chest pains. When I shined a flashlight into her eyes, I could notice that.
Objection, Your Honor, that's hearsay.
Response, Mr. Johnson.
May I ask which statements are hearsay?
Where she was asking Genesis about asking Genesis about the chest pains and the condition and all that.
So, sorry, just to clarify, you're objecting to Dr. Kwan's statements as hearsay, not Genesis's statements?
Yeah.
Okay, response, Mr. Johnson.
Sorry, which of Dr. Kwan's statements are you saying is hearsay?
Oh no, I meant Genesis's response, when he was asking Genesis about the chest pains and through the medical diagnosis.
Response, Mr. Johnson.
Yeah, as you know, hearsay is an out-of-court statement offered to prove the truth of the matter asserted. Whether or not Genesis has chest pains is irrelevant to this statement. I'm simply asking the witness for it to show his subsequent actions and to show the tools he had at his disposal when he was diagnosing Ms. Petrillo. That is why it is not hearsay.
Do you have any exceptions to the hearsay rule that you would like to put forward?
Subsequent action.
Why do you need the content of the statement if it's just for subsequent action?
Because it was important for Dr. Jim and Kwan to know that Genesis was having chest pains in order for him to diagnose and treat her accurately.
So it sounds like you do want them to be offered for the truth.
Well, more for how they factored into Kwan's treatment of her.
Okay, anything, sorry, Mr. Cathari, I kind of took over there for you. Any last
Well,
response?
Your Honor, yeah, I was about to say the same thing. He's using those statements to prove truth of the matter asserted, and that he doesn't actually need Genesis's statements to make a diagnosis as a medical expert in toxicology.
Okay, seeing that Mr. Johnson is not offering an exception to the hearsay rule, I'm going to sustain that objection.
Yes, Your Honor. Okay, doctor, now I'd like to talk about some of the tests that you ran. Your Honor, permission to share Exhibit 5 to my screen? It has been pre-admitted through stipulation 3.
Yes, you don't have to ask for permission to share it unless you want to show it to the jury.
Okay.
Are you showing this to the jury this time?
Yes, Your Honor. That's my
All right.
intention. Are we okay to proceed, Your Honor? Have you been able to find the exhibit?
Yes, thank you. Appreciate it.
Dr. Kwan, which test is this?
This is one of the blood tests we ran on Ms. Petrillo.
What did this test tell you?
That there were low levels of acetylcholinesterase in Ms. Petrillo's system.
What does that mean, doctor?
Well, acetylcholinesterase is an enzyme produced in the liver. And when the body metabolizes organophosphate poisoning, the levels of acetylcholinesterase drop. This is important because doctors can use it to, it's so closely correlated to organophosphate poisoning that doctors can use it to conclusively diagnose organophosphate poisoning.
Doctor, did this test Genesis's blood alcohol concentration?
It did. Genesis BAC at the time of the test was 0.16.
Did that tell you anything medically?
Not really, other than Genesis should be nowhere behind the wheel of a car. 0.16 is too low of a BAC to be fatal or life-threatening.
Okay, doctor, now I'd like to show a different test that you ran. Your Honor, permission to put Exhibit 6 on my screen. It has also been pre-admitted through stipulation 3 and also to publish it to the jury.
You may. All right, I have it up. You can continue. Thank you.
Thanks, Your Honor. Dr. Kwan, is this another of the tests that you ran?
Yes, it is.
Which test is this?
This is the unknown poisons and toxins analysis.
What were the results of this test?
Well, there were 2 tests ran, a blood test and a stomach contents test.
What did the blood test tell you?
That the presence of isofenfos, an organophosphate pesticide compound, was found, and the presence of ethanol, which came from the alcohol Ms. Petrillo was drinking that night.
What did the stomach contents test tell you?
The exact same, that again, the isofenfos, the organophosphate poisoning compound, was found, and then again, ethanol from the alcohol Ms. Petrillo was drinking that night.
Doctor, at this point, did you have enough information to diagnose Ms. Petrillo before she died?
I did, yes.
What was your diagnosis of her?
I diagnosed her as suffering from organophosphate pesticide poisoning.
What steps did you take to treat her?
Well, there is a known antidote for organophosphate pesticide poisoning, so we began the checklist to administer that antidote.
Did that antidote help Ms. Petrillo?
Unfortunately, no. As we were in the process of administering the antidote, Ms. Petrillo fell into a coma and then passed away in the morning.
No further questions?
Defense, do you have a cross?
Yes, Your Honor.
Floor is yours.
Good morning, Dr. Kwan. I just want to first talk to you a little bit about your background. You're on the board of directors for the Doctors for Organic Solutions.
Yes, I am.
And this group advocates against the use of chemical pesticides, correct?
Yes, it does.
In fact, you hope that your testimony in today's case would convince lawmakers to strongly curtail or even outright ban the use of chemical pesticides?
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, cases like this are such, I mean, it's an unfortunate example of how dangerous chemical pesticides can be and why organic solutions are the safer way forward.
All right, now we're going to go and talk about your emergency room diagnosis and your further work with Ms. Petrillo. You stated that you soon started to believe that Petrillo ingested an organophosphate poison after you admitted her into the emergency room, correct?
After I was able to perform a more thorough examination, review the results of these tests, I came to the informed conclusion that Ms. Petrillo was suffering from organophosphate pesticide poisoning.
And it's impossible to detect organophosphates in the bloodstream.
No, it is not. Like we showed on direct examination, the exhibits, the presence of isofenphos, the organophosphate pesticide compound was found, so we can detect the presence of organophosphate pesticide in the blood.
But that's through other indicators like cholinesterase activity and the other enzymes that you just mentioned, right?
Well, the first test we ran did find acetylcholinesterase, but we ran a second blood test as well, and that found isofenphos in it, which is that organophosphate pesticide poisoning compound.
But yeah, the way to determine it's in the bloodstream is through the indicators though, right?
Yes, right. Yes, exactly.
All right. And these indicators could be low even through the presence of other material besides pesticide, correct?
I'm sorry, I don't understand your question, counsel.
So the amount of these enzymes could be low due to other reasons other than pesticides too, correct?
Are you specifically talking about acetylcholinesterase?
Yes, as well as some of the other enzymes.
Then yes, yes.
All right. And it's true that low acetylcholinesterase and the other enzymes that you mentioned in your report and your direct examination, it doesn't tell the doctor the specific amount of pesticide a patient was exposed to.
No, there's no way for sure of knowing the amount, but again, our tests tell us the presence of organophosphate poisoning.
Nor does it tell you where the pesticide came from.
What do you mean by that, counsel? How it entered Ms. Petrillo's system?
Yes.
The tests themselves don't tell us that, but in my examination, I ruled out that it was ingested orally through inhalation because the timeline of the symptoms didn't match up with inhalation, and I ruled out contact with the pesticide because there was nothing on Ms. Petrillo's skin that showed that there could have been some contact, meaning that the pesticide was most likely ingested orally.
All right, but it's still most likely ingested. It doesn't tell you the source or any of the other places where Ms. Petrillo could have gotten this pesticide from.
No, I guess not, counsel.
All right, and you noted that Petrillo's cause of death
Yes,
was
Your Honor.
respiratory failure.
Can you hear
Yes,
me?
I can.
By saying all right, but yeah, yes, and opposing counsel is commenting on my witness's testimony.
Okay, Mr. Kuthari, I will ask that from this point going forward, you just refrain from commenting on the witness's testimony. As far as the yeah and all rights, the ums and uhs, I understand are things that all of us say, and I won't hold those against you.
I'm sorry about that, Your Honor.
That's all right. We can continue.
So you noted Petrillo's cause of death as respiratory failure?
Yes, I did.
Due to pesticide poisoning?
Yes.
Before an official test had been made?
No, based on my more thorough examination and the results of the tests that we had, shown earlier, that's what I used to make that my final diagnosis.
But that was not an official test. That was your own diagnosis, right?
I'm sorry, which tester is not an official test?
Your tests in the emergency room when you were attending to Ms. Petrillo.
Well, no, when we send blood samples and the sampled stomach contents to the lab, those are real tests.
But a lot of that came after your initial diagnosis when you first met Ms. Petrillo and saw her symptoms, right?
Right. Yeah, because my first diagnosis was alcohol poisoning, And then through the results of those tests, I was able to come to the informed conclusion that this was organophosphate pesticide poisoning.
So this was before an official test had been made.
No, this was after I got the results of the blood test and the sampled stomach contents test.
All right. So now you were not present on June 7th of 2019 at Peonia Estates.
No, I wasn't there. I was on call.
You have no idea how the pesticide would have come into contact with the wine.
No, I do not.
You can't tell us what the wine processing looks like there either, right?
No, I'm unfamiliar with that.
Or how they manage their wine.
Again, unfamiliar with it.
All right. Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions.
Any redirect?
No, Your Honor.
All right, thank you for your time, Dr. Kwan. You may be excused. Does the plaintiff have any further witnesses?
Yes, Your Honor. Plaintiff calls Danny Francasio to the stand. And I would like, just for the record, I am Ms. Taryn Scott.
All right, thank you, Ms. Scott. Thank you for being here today, Ms. Francasio. Ms. Scott, the floor is yours.
Please introduce yourself to the members of the jury.
My name is Miss Danny Francasio.
And Ms. Francasio, do you work?
Yes, I do. I established, own, and run Rosie and Pedro Winery, one of the premier wineries here in Rapid River Valley.
Then are you familiar with Peony Estates?
Of course I am, yes. Harper Martini, who actually owns Peony Estates, was one of my previous employees.
And how did you get along with the defendant?
Well, when she worked for me, she was actually a great manager, and at the time, I considered her family, her and her daughter, Casey. I was so happy to have them in my life then, actually.
Did this friendly relationship last between you and the defendant?
No, it didn't. Unfortunately, after 3 years of working for me and, being family almost, she storms into my office and tells me she's leaving to start her own winery. I mean, I considered her family, and this was how she treated me.
So after the defendant quit, did you stay in contact with the defendant?
Of course, I wanted nothing to do with her, but she started sending me emails all the time, questions about her winery. She was having issues with pesticides, I guess, and it was actually quite concerning.
And Ms. Francasio, would you recognize those emails?
Yes, I would.
Your Honor, plaintiff offers Exhibit 17 to constructively share with the jury.
You may, thank you.
Ms. Francasio, can you see this?
Or hold on, has this been entered into evidence yet?
Your Honor, this has not been entered into evidence yet.
Okay, so then this will not be shared with the jury until it has been entered.
Yes, Your Honor. May we share our screen to show Exhibit 17?
Yes.
Thank you, Your Honor. And now may we constructively share it with the jury?
Are you entering it into evidence at this point?
Yes.
Any objection?
Your Honor, she hasn't laid the foundation for administering it into evidence. We have no problem with it being in evidence, but...
May I respond, Your Honor?
Very briefly, because I also have not heard any foundation laid.
So the Ms. Francasio mentioned that the amicable relationship between her and the defendant did not last, and that the defendant remained in contact with Ms. Francasio through a series of emails. And I asked Ms. Francasio if she would recognize those emails, and she said that she would. Therefore, I am sharing them with you, Your Honor, and constructively with the jury. Okay,
so that is not the foundation that is required under the rules of evidence in order to authenticate a document. So I'm going to sustain that objection. It sounds like the defense doesn't have any issues with this being entered. They just want to make sure that the proper evidentiary rules are followed. If you need a minute to speak with your opposing counsel about the proper questions, please do so.
But yes, Your Honor, I was proceeding to ask the proper questions to lay the foundation for this exhibit.
Okay, it cannot be shown to the jury until it is entered, and that foundation has to be laid before it is entered. So the objection is sustained. This is not in evidence yet, but if you want to ask those questions and then offer it, we can talk about it then.
Yes, Your Honor.
So what were the emails that the defendant sent to you, Ms. Francasio?
Well, as I said, she was having pesticide problems and she was just asking me for advice and kept emailing me, and she wanted help with her winery, I guess.
And are these emails a fair and accurate copy?
Yes.
Your Honor, plaintiff offers to put Exhibit 17 into evidence.
Any objection?
No objections, Your Honor.
All right, Exhibit 17 is entered and is now constructively shared with the jury.
Now, Ms. Francasio, what did you tell the defendant? Let's take a look at the second paragraph, first sentence.
More importantly, you know pesticides are poisonous, right?
And the last two sentences of this same paragraph, are you still with me?
Yes.
What did you tell the defendant?
This is very serious. Someone could die.
Now, I would like to take us back a bit. Did you still have a relationship with Casey?
Oh, yes, of course I did. I loved Casey. I mean, she had done nothing wrong to me, unlike her mom. And I also knew her fiance, Genesis Petrillo. She was a regular customer at my winery.
Have you seen the defendant and Genesis together?
Yes, I actually have. One time they were both at my winery.
And when was this?
It would have been July 2015, as I said, at Rosie and Pedro.
And what happened?
Well, Genesis, was a regular customer and he was visiting one day. I was so happy to have her. Sorry, excuse me. And Harper just storms in. She was completely set off and started yelling at Genesis. She screeched at the top of her lungs, "If you even try to take Casey away from me, it'll be the last thing you ever do."
Then what happened?
I kicked her out. I banned her from coming back ever again.
Now, was this the last you heard from the defendant?
No. Then she started calling me and leaving me voicemails, complaining about Genesis and the wedding plans.
Your Honor, plaintiff offers 18 D&E pursuant to MRE 8036 and pursuant to 18F, the declaration of Roger Michaels, who was the custodian of these business records. May we share the screen to show these business records authenticated by Roger Michaels?
So you're offering them in evidence at this point as well?
Yes, Your Honor. But first, we would like to share the document that authenticated these voicemails, 18F.
Yes, you can share that. It will not be shared with the jury.
Can you see this, Ms. Francasio?
Sorry, no, I cannot.
18 D&E.
Oh.
Can you see this?
Yes.
And what is this, Ms. Francasio?
Currently, I'm looking at the declaration of Roger Michaels.
Yes, and Exhibit 18D. Could we share that, Ms. Quinlivan? Thank you. Can you see this?
Yes.
And what is this?
This is one of those voicemails that Harper left me.
And Ms. Francasio, do you know when the wedding was?
Yes, I was invited, actually. It was June 8th, or supposed to be June 8th, 2019.
And how many months was this before the wedding?
This was sent January, so 6 months before the wedding.
And Your Honor, plaintiff offers Exhibit D into evidence and to constructively share with the jury.
Any objections?
Objection, Your Honor, to more prejudicial than probative.
Okay, I'll hear from you.
The contents of this voicemail include an exchange between Genesis and Harper, and we've already talked about an email correspondence, and she's trying to bring forth just negative tension and use that towards Harper Martini's credibility in the case. And so the contents of the email are more prejudicial because it's just about Genesis and Harper's relationship.
Response, Ms. Scott?
Yes. Your Honor, this is probative on bias, and the standard is too high and is not met by the opposing counsel. We are here today to discuss whether or not Harper Martini intentionally poisoned Genesis Petrillo and if that poison caused death. And these voicemails are probative on bias, therefore admissible, Your Honor.
Ms. Wassell, if you have a brief response to that.
And
Go ahead, Ms. Scott.
I would like to also add, if Your Honor does not believe that to be true, that these voicemails are also probative on motive.
Ms. Wassell, response to that?
No objection, Your Honor.
Okay, so you're withdrawing your objection?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, so this document is allowed in and will be shared with the jury as well.
Yes, Your Honor. Now, let's take a look starting at Genesis. What did the defendant tell you 6 months before the wedding?
Genesis is like a cellar pest. Good for nothing, just making things bad wherever they go. They need to make a Genesis pesticide. I'd buy that. Maybe I'll check Amazon real quick. They have everything.
Now, Ms. Francasio, was this the last you heard from the defendant?
Oh, no. I believe there were more voicemails after this. She kept contacting me. I listened to them, but I didn't respond.
Your Honor, this is another one of those voicemails sent by the defendant that has been authenticated as a business record. It is Exhibit 18E if you're searching for your record.
All right, thank you. Are you offering this into evidence at this time?
Your Honor, the plaintiff previously offered this into evidence pursuant to MRE 8036, 18F, authenticating both 18D and E, Your Honor.
Okay, so I know we just talked, the last one we just looked at was 17 with all the comments about the poisoning and Genesis, right?
The first one was 17. The one that we previously looked at was 18D, and this one is 18E.
Okay, are there any objections to the content of this specific Exhibit 18E from the defense?
No objections, Your Honor.
All right, it is so entered and is shared with the jury.
Now, Ms. Francasio, what did the defendant say to you just a month before the wedding? Starting from
I mean, my head is spinning, Danny. I can hardly say the words. Casey, oh, it's just not right. Miserable, selfish Genesis. I've had enough. I'm beyond the breaking point. It's going to be me or Genesis, not both of us.
Question, Your Honor, the needlessly cumulative.
May I respond, Your Honor?
Briefly.
Yes, these statements are not cumulative, for we are only highlighting pertinent portions of the evidence and not reading the entire document itself. Therefore, not cumulative, Your Honor.
Ms. Scott, do you plan on asking Ms. Francasio any questions about the portions that she's reading, or were you just having her reading portions?
I was simply having her read that one portion.
Okay, I'm going to sustain the objection. I will not strike anything that's already been read onto evidence, but I will strike anything further that is read from that document.
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes, Your Honor.
And with that, plaintiff has no further questions.
Cross-exam?
Yes, Your Honor. Ms. Francasio, you're the owner of Rosie and Pedro Winery,
Yes, I am.
and you have run that business for roughly 15 years.
Yes, I established it from the ground up and now I run it, yes.
And in 2012, you hired Miss Martini as a cellar hand, correct?
I did, yes.
And while working at Rosie and Pedro's, Miss Martini was responsible for ensuring the area was free of pests.
Yes, she did. She worked in the cellar and worked with the pesticides, yes.
Oh, one moment. May I ask for one moment? Sorry, my computer
Yeah, of
froze.
course.
Okay. Sorry. In January of 2015, Miss Martini planned to open her own winery.
Yes, she did. She told me she was leaving to open her own winery. That is correct.
And this made you upset.
Naturally so, yeah, especially as the fact that we were friends too, not just business partners, but family.
And you would agree that at this point, you never wanted Harper on the property again.
I did not. No, would have been inappropriate.
And the opening of Peony Estates severely hurt your business, right?
It did, yes. Naturally, when a competitor comes about, we did go down in sales a bit.
Exactly. Miss Martini became your competition.
Her winery did become my competition, yes.
And you would agree that Miss Martini even betrayed you.
I would say that, sure.
And you would agree that you blame Miss Martini for the decline of your business.
Objection, Your Honor. Relevance.
Response?
May I be heard?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, go ahead, Ms. Scott. I'll allow you to further explain your objection first.
Yes, the business portion of Ms. Francasio's winery is irrelevant to whether or not the defendant poisoned the bottle of pesticide, and if that poison caused death. This is a battery charge, not negligence. Therefore, her business matters is irrelevant to the case, Your Honor.
Response, Mr. Sell?
I may respond. Opposing counsel just did a full direct where they brought in emails and voicemails between the witness and Miss Martini, showing that same relationship and those same business correspondence. If that was relevant and relevant to the case and to their testimony, it is relevant to cross-examination and defense's case as well.
May I respond, Your Honor?
Very briefly.
Yes, I would just like to clarify that plaintiff offered the emails to show that the defendant had knowledge of pesticides being dangerous, not of their relationship as business, employer, and employee.
Any brief response? Oh, I'm sorry, Ms. Scott. There's some delay here. You can continue.
No problem, Your Honor. Therefore, your line of questioning about Ms. Francasio's business matters is irrelevant.
May I respond?
You may briefly.
The whole reason that their business matters are relevant is because they know about the pesticides and they know about what is and what is wrong with pesticide poisoning and that whole matter through their business, their wineries. And so their correspondence, especially like you had mentioned before, when you brought in those emails, they apply in the same way.
All right, and this is a comment for everybody. I'm going to ask that both plaintiff and defense attorneys, when responding to objection arguments, only responds to the judge and not talk to each other. But I understand both arguments. I appreciate both arguments. Ms. Scott, I am going to overrule your objection at this time.
Yes, Your Honor.
Ms. Francazzo, now I want to talk to you about Casey and Genesis's wedding. In October 2018, Casey and Genesis booked their wedding at Rosie and Pedro's, correct?
They approached me about planning it there, yes. We hadn't finalized anything, but we looked at the packages and they were highly interested.
However, in November, they changed the wedding venue to be held at Peony Estates.
Yes, they did, because Harper Martini owned it and her daughter would want to get married there.
But you didn't attend the wedding.
No, I was invited, but I did not attend.
And this refusal to the wedding stemmed from the fact that your relationship with Miss Martini was a little bit uncomfortable.
A little bit, yes.
Now, I want to talk about Peony Estates itself. Now, Miss Martini reached out to you a few times about Peony Estates, correct?
Yes.
And there was an email exchange between you two.
Yes, there was.
And you would recognize that if I showed it to you today in court.
The email exchange?
Yes, I believe it has already been previously admitted into evidence under Exhibit 17 by plaintiff in the direct.
Yes, I would recognize it.
Permission to share the exhibit with the jury and opposing counsel?
You may.
Co-counsel, can someone share the exhibit, please? I'm going to move on to line of questioning because we've already seen the email. We know what the contents are. Through this exchange, you became aware that Peony Estates had trouble controlling pests at Peony Estates.
Sorry, could you repeat the question?
Through the exchange with Miss Martini, you became aware that Peony Estates had trouble controlling pests.
Yes, they were.
And you knew that they didn't know how to store pesticides properly?
I mean, she was asking me questions about it, so I assumed that they were, having storage problems.
And you knew that they were specifically about struggles with pests in their wine cellar.
Yes.
And you were not present on June 7th of 2019.
No, I was not.
You don't know how they were managing their wine on that day specifically.
No, not on that day specifically. I assumed it was like any other day.
And you don't know how they were managing their pesticides that day at all.
No.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Objection, Your Honor, if it isn't too late.
What's the objection?
I would like to clarify that this is a battery charge, not negligence per se. Therefore, the way pesticides are stored and kept is irrelevant to the case.
Brief response, Ms. Massell.
May I respond? The battery charge is from plaintiff to the defense. We are clarifying that there could have been a pesticide problem, which goes towards that accidents do happen and that these were lying around and that this was a problem. And so therefore it was not intentional, but it was an accident.
Yeah, Ms. Scott.
Your Honor?
No, I don't need to hear any further argument. While you are correct that plaintiff is the one that's bringing a battery case, the defense is allowed to put on it a defense, which is their alternate version of events of what they're claiming is happening. And I do believe that this is relevant to go against the plaintiff's claim. So I'm going to overrule the objection. Ms. Massell, if you want to re-ask the question, you may.
Yes, Your Honor. And you don't know how they were managing their pesticides that day, correct?
Correct.
Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions.
Any redirect?
Yes, Your Honor. May I ask you a question?
Me?
Yes, Your Honor.
Yeah.
Would plaintiff be permitted to give, to show the battery pretrial order?
If you're asking the court to take notice of the battery pretrial order, I will take notice of that. That's something that you can, your team can use in your closing if you would like, but I don't believe this witness is aware of what the pretrial order is, and I don't believe that you're able to ask her any questions on that.
Yes, Your Honor. Thank you. With that being said, no further questions.
All right. Thank you for being here, Ms. Francasio. You are dismissed. Any further evidence from the plaintiff?
Yes, Your Honor. I would like to make the court aware, if you would allow me to share my screen.
Yes.
Court order. This is for our battery charge. I would like to make the court aware of this right here, this second paragraph. It says the parties are admonished that evidence at trial is limited to a battery claim, that any evidence that is solely relevant to the negligence per se claim will be excluded. For example, neither party may enter any evidence or testimony related to whether the use and or storage of pesticides by Peonia Estates complied with the regulations.
Okay. I understand where the plaintiff is coming from now. Thank you for bringing that to my attention. Does the defense want to make any brief comments on that before the plaintiff rests their case in chief?
Not at this time.
Okay. Plaintiff, any further evidence?
No, Your Honor, we rest our case in chief. I would just like to request a 5 to 10 minute break, recess, if that's allowed.
How are we looking at all loss? How much time do we have left?
We have to ask our timekeepers.
Your Honor, I think the problem is that we were never informed of when all loss was, neither in the captain's group chat or in the by the people who were arranging the courtrooms. So that's the problem.
All right, so we're gonna go ahead and err on the side of caution. We'll take a 5-minute break. If one of you guys wouldn't mind texting or reaching out to the appropriate people to find out what that time is so we can make sure to abide by that.
I've already done so, Your Honor. Thank you.
Great. I'm showing 11:31. We will come back at 11:36.
Hello, can everybody hear me?
We can co-counsel.
Your Honor, can you hear me?
I can, yes, but you're a little echoey.
I'm sorry, what did you say?
I'm able to hear you, but I'm getting a little bit of an echo, like I hear everything twice.
Okay, Your Honor, I'll try to fix that. Thank you.
It might be on my end, though. I don't know if anybody else is having that same issue.
Your Honor, I had the same issue. I also wanted to clarify that I just heard back. All loss appears to be at 12:40, and that's just for both timekeepers to take note.
Okay, thank you for finding that out.
Of course.
Your Honor, is the echo fixed?
Yes, it is for me. Thank you.
I just want to thank you again for bearing with me through all the technical troubles. I really appreciate that.
No worries. I know that this is one of the earlier competitions of the season, and now's the time to work all this stuff out.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm sorry, guys. I just lost my ballot, so I'm gonna need a minute to make sure that I can pull it back up before we continue. I apologize for the delay.
Your Honor, while you're pulling your ballot back up, if you ever need to rewrite names, plaintiff does have a list of rules as well as names. If you want, I could paste that in the chat for you.
I've got all the names written down, but thank you.
Of course.
Okay, I have been handwriting my scores as well as putting them into the computer because I had a weird feeling that something like this is going to happen. So don't worry, your scores are saved. Give me one more minute, and if I can't seem to pull it up, I'll just continue to handwrite them as we go, and then we'll physically fill it in. Oh, nope, here we go. Okay. Is everybody back from break?
Yes, Your Honor.
Defense, are you ready to proceed? It seems like plaintiff is ready.
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, and it seems like everything is working on my end. So, defense, you may begin your case in chief by calling your first witness.
Your Honor, at this time, defense calls Harper Martini to the stand.
All right. Ms. Martini, you have been pre-sworn. Defense, the floor is yours.
Please introduce yourself to the court.
Hello, my name is Harper Martini.
Could you please tell us what you do for a living?
I grew up in Napa Valley, so I was basically raised in a vineyard. I'm currently the owner of Peony Estates, a local winery.
Could you tell us a little bit more about your personal life?
Well, my life basically revolves around Casey, my only child. I'm a single mom, so Casey has always come first.
Can you describe your relationship with Casey?
I've always been extremely close with Casey and prioritized Casey's happiness and well-being. The only time we had issues was throughout Casey's relationship with Genesis.
So you mentioned Genesis Petrillo, and we've heard quite a lot today in court about your relationship with Genesis. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Well, we never had the best relationship. From the moment I met Genesis, she made disrespectful remarks about my wine, but that didn't keep me from continually trying to establish our relationship. Genesis made Casey happy, so I wanted to do my best to get along with her.
Now, Mrs. Martini, I want to talk a little bit about why you're here. So, do you know why you're here today?
Yes, I'm being accused of poisoning Genesis on the night of the rehearsal dinner.
And what night was the rehearsal dinner?
On June 7th of 2019.
Mrs. Martini, I must ask you, did you poison Genesis Petrillo on the night of June 7th?
Absolutely not. Genesis and I didn't have the best relationship, but I would never intentionally poison someone. Like I said, Genesis made Casey happy, and all I ever wanted was for Casey to be happy.
So, based on what you believe, how would you describe Genesis and Casey's relationship?
Genesis and Casey loved each other and wanted to be together forever. They were great until Genesis and Casey made plans to move all the way to France. Obviously, I didn't want to be away from Casey, but I figured that there was nothing I could do about it. So I just tried to help plan the wedding as best as I could. I wanted them to have the perfect day.
You mentioned wanting to take part in the wedding planning. Can you elaborate on that?
Originally, the wedding was planned to be at Rosie and Pedro's winery, but after putting in so much work, it was moved to my winery, Peony Estates. I thought that having a great wedding would bring a ton of good publicity, so I was doing everything I could to make the wedding as good as possible for my kid and for my business.
Now, Mrs. Martini, I want to talk a little bit about the night of the wedding rehearsal. So, how did the evening start?
At first, it was going really well. Genesis showed up late, but everything I had planned was going awesome. The food was great, and I even made a toast to the happy couple. I actually made a second toast specifically towards Genesis in hopes to try to establish a better relationship since she was going to be part of the family.
Can you tell us a little bit more about this second toast?
So I wanted to give Genesis a bottle of Cara. It was the only bottle we had, so I thought it would be like extending an olive branch on the night of the rehearsal dinner.
And would you recognize a photograph of this wine bottle if I were to show it to you today?
Yes.
Your Honor, we permission to enter Exhibit 2A, which has already been entered into evidence under Stipulation 3.
It was entered pre-trial, so you may share it and show it to the jury.
Thank you. Now, Mrs. Martini, why was this wine so special to give to Genesis?
Well, Genesis received a fresh new blend of Cara wine. Cara was really expensive and one of a kind, so I figured it could serve as a turning point in our relationship.
Thank you. We can remove the exhibit from the screen. So what happened after you presented Genesis with this bottle of wine?
Well, after I gave Genesis the bottle of wine, I left. At around 2:30 a.m., I was informed that someone had been rushed to the hospital. Initially, I thought it was Genesis because, well, I did give her a whole bottle of wine and she had been drinking that night. Plus, Kara has a really high alcohol content.
So after receiving this information, what did you do?
I went into Genesis's room, which only confirmed my suspicions because I found the entire bottle of wine on the floor and empty. Genesis was nowhere to be found. The next morning, I found out Genesis passed away.
Now, I want to transition a little bit to Genesis's death. So we've heard in court today that there were traces of pesticides found inside the wine bottle. Do you have any idea how that could have gotten in there?
Well, we do have pesticides at the winery. We use them to keep bugs off of our crops. We do try to make sure that the pesticides are far away from the wine, but we've had a couple of problems.
Do you recall sending any emails about this pest problem?
I do.
Would you recognize these emails if I were to show them to you in court today?
Yes, I would.
Your Honor, permission to show opposing counsel what has been previously marked as Exhibits 13 and 14?
And these have not been entered yet, correct?
No, they have not.
Okay, yeah, you may screen share to, it will be shared with the judges and with opposing counsel, but it will not be shown to the jury yet.
Thank you. Now, Mrs. Martini, what have I just shown you?
These are 2 emails I sent to Danny from Casio regarding our pest problem.
And are these fair and accurate copies of these emails?
Yes, they are.
Did they appear to have been altered in any way since you last saw them?
No.
Your Honor, defense now offers Exhibits 13 and 14 into evidence.
Any objection?
No objection, Your Honor.
All right, 13 and 14 are entered without objection. Would you like to share them with the jury at this time?
Yes.
All right, they're shared with the jury.
Thank you. Mrs. Martini, what can you tell us about these emails?
Well, we were having some pest problems, so I needed some advice about pesticides. I also just needed to learn more about the dangers of pesticides since we had an employee get very sick.
How did this employee get so sick?
So our employee Doolittle left a glass of wine out by accident. Later, somebody came in to spray the room and the pesticides ended up getting in the wine. Doolittle only took a sip or 2 and I immediately grabbed it from him. But from the little he drank, he got very sick and almost died.
After this incident, were there any measures put in place to ensure that no pesticides would come near the wine again?
Objection, Your Honor.
Yes?
This line of questioning goes towards a negligence charge, and in today's case, we are pursuing a battery charge. The use of the pesticides and any storage of the pesticides are not allowed to come out in today's trial because that lies under the negligence charge, as I had previously shown before break, and so this line of questioning is not allowed.
Your Honor,
Okay.
may I respond?
In a moment, real quick, reviewing the pretrial order, I understand what the plaintiff's argument is, and I also understand what the defense's position is on this. First, I believe that this should have been raised the first time that the defense started talking about the pesticide issue in the first. Either way, I think that some evidence had come in several times before the objection was raised by the plaintiff. I think it's a good objection to raise, but it needed to be raised the first time any of the pesticides evidence started to come in. Furthermore, the pretrial order mentions that there is no evidence is allowed in if it solely goes to the negligence claim. And I do understand that the defense's argument and the defense's entire case theory today is that that it was the poor storage of the pesticides that led to the bottle getting tampered. Whether or not that rises to the level of negligence or not is something that we're not going to be able to talk about today because of the late raising of the objection. So what I'm going to do is, plaintiff, I understand your objection. I will allow you to keep an objection throughout the entirety of the defense's case in chief today that you are objecting to any and all evidence of the pesticides. That will be noted for the record and will be available for you all to appeal if at the end of the jury trial today the results are not in your favor and you feel like that is something that should be appealed. However, since we're this far in, I am going to allow the defense to bring in this evidence over the objection that will be noted through the entire case for the plaintiff. If you believe at any point that any of the evidence being brought in is not going to the defense's argument that it was an accidental poisoning rather than a purposeful poisoning, and you think that it doesn't go to that, but rather straight to the defense of a negligence claim, please re-raise the objection. We'll talk about it then. But for the moment, I am going to allow this in. But again, I'm allowing it in understanding what the plaintiff's stance is on this and allowing your continuing objection to be noted for the record for purpose of appeal. Do both parties understand what I'm saying about that?
Yes,
Your Honor, you cut out for me, so I didn't get to hear the last part of you.
Oh no. Okay. Essentially, can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can. Sorry about that.
Okay. So I'm going to allow the plaintiff on the record will have a continuing objection every time a question is asked by the defense about the pesticides. There will already be an objection on the record that is noted. You do not have to continue to object to everything. I am going to summarily overrule those at this point because we've already allowed a significant amount of this evidence onto the record before the plaintiff objected. So we already have prejudiced the jury towards that point when the objection was raised. So it's going to be allowed in over objection. If at any point any of the testimony appears to not have any relevance to the defense's argument and rather just goes straight to some sort of negligence claim that we don't have here today, you may raise the objection. We'll handle it then. But otherwise, you don't have to object to every question. It will be noted. And I understand what both sides' stance is on this. And I think that this is a unique thing. And it's very interesting to hear from both of you guys. I think this is a good argument from both sides. But I don't want to take up any more of our limited time today on it. Do both sides understand or were able to hear everything that I said?
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes.
Okay. Any questions about that continuing objection or anything?
No, Your Honor.
All right. So the objection is noted and overruled. The defense may continue.
Mrs. Martini, after this incident with your employee Doolittle, were there any measures put in place to ensure that no pesticides would come near the wine again?
I tried my best to put extra precautions into practice, but because of our pest problem, we did have to frequently spray to keep the bugs away. Sometimes there just happened to be half-empty bottles laying near the pesticides.
Now, Mrs. Martini, did you ever intentionally put pesticide in or near the bottle of Cara wine that you gifted to Genesis Petrillo?
Absolutely not. I can't say that we didn't have pesticides near the wine, but I would never intentionally try to poison someone. Like I've said, Genesis made Casey happy and Casey loved Genesis. I would never take that away from my child. What happened to Genesis was just a horrible accident.
Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions.
Cross?
Yes, Your Honor. Good morning, Miss Martini. Can you hear and see me okay?
Yes.
And can you let me know if that changes at any point?
Yes, I will.
Thank you. Now, Miss Martini, Casey is your only child, right?
Yes.
She's the only family you have left?
Yes, just me and Casey.
She's the sun to your planet.
Yes.
And her only flaw was her significant other, Genesis Petrillo.
Yes, that is true.
Oh, you wish that Casey and Genesis had never met.
Unfortunately, I did.
And you believe that Genesis was a bad influence on Casey.
Sometimes Genesis was a bad influence on Casey.
One time, Casey was sent to the hospital because Genesis encouraged her to drink too much.
Yes, Genesis loved to drink.
And this must have worried you.
It did. I was very worried for Casey's well-being.
You also hoped to pass your business down to Casey one day.
Yes.
But you thought that if Genesis was in the picture, Casey would not think highly enough of your business.
Yes, that is true.
So this caused some tension between you and Genesis.
Yeah, we didn't have the best relationship, but I tried to reestablish that multiple times.
Yeah, so you tried to bury the hatchet by throwing an engagement party on June 21st, 2018 for Genesis and Casey.
Yes, I even paid for all of it.
Yeah, and at this engagement party, you overheard Genesis suggesting to move the wedding to Francasio's Rosie and Pedro's winery.
Yes, that's where they wanted to have it initially.
And after hearing this, you were angry.
Yes, it upset me a little bit because they are my rival, but I figured there was nothing I could do.
In fact, you were never angrier in your life.
Yes, that is true.
And if Casey was not there, you might have even slapped Genesis.
Maybe.
Now, this wasn't the only time Genesis had made you angry, right?
No, we had a couple of problems in the past, but I tried to work it out multiple times.
At one point, Genesis had let you know that she was taking Casey with her to France.
Yes, that caused some trouble, but I figured there was nothing I could do about it, so I just tried to move forward and plan the wedding. I wanted them to have the perfect day.
But after hearing this information, you wanted nothing more to cancel the wedding.
I did want to cancel the wedding, but that's not what happened. I even actually paid for the wedding.
But you were worried that with Genesis around, your relationship with Casey would not last much longer.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that? You cut out a little bit.
Sorry. Because you were worried that with Genesis around, your relationship with Casey would not last much longer.
Yes, she was going to take him all the way to France.
Now, I want to talk about June 7th, 2019, the day of the rehearsal dinner. You wanted the wedding to go perfectly for Casey, right?
I did. I wanted them to have the perfect day.
So when Genesis showed up around 15 minutes late, you were irritated.
Yes, that was a little bit irritating.
But all Genesis did when you confronted her about it was laugh.
Yes, she laughed.
And after this interaction, you wanted nothing more than for Genesis to be gone.
Yes, but...
And it was after this interaction when you decided to give Genesis a bottle of Cara wine.
Yes, I figured it could serve as a turning point in our relationship. I wanted to reestablish our relationship since Genesis was going to be part of the family soon.
It was after this irritating interaction that you decided to give Genesis the wine, correct?
Yes.
Now, I'd like to direct your attention to June 8th, around 2:30 in the morning. You received a phone call from Austin Lewis at this time, right?
Yes, I did.
And he told you that someone had gone to the hospital, right?
Yes.
You figured it was Genesis?
Yeah, well, I did give her a whole bottle of wine to herself.
Yeah, and you found the same empty bottle of Cara wine in Genesis's bedroom?
Yeah, completely empty. I even told her not to drink all of it at once.
But to your knowledge, only Genesis drank this bottle of wine, right?
Yes.
Now, Miss Martini, you have the pesticide organophosphate that Dr. Kwan concluded killed Genesis in your winery, don't you?
Yes, we do. We use it to keep bugs off of our crops because of our pest problem that we've had continuously.
You use this pesticide to kill bugs, right?
Yes.
And you are aware that if pesticides are consumed, even at a small amount, that they can be deadly.
Yes, I'm aware.
In fact, you had a pesticide poisoning scare before.
We have.
One of your employees was Kirby Doolittle, right?
Yes, it was a complete accident.
Kirby Doolittle accidentally left a glass of wine out.
Yes.
And there was a spraying going on where the wine was located.
Yes.
The wine was contaminated with pesticides.
Yes.
And then when you grabbed the glass of wine, you couldn't even tell that there were pesticides in it.
No, I wasn't able to tell, but I did immediately grab it from him.
And you couldn't tell because you couldn't smell the pesticides?
I could not.
And you could not see the pesticides in the wine?
I could not.
When Kirby did drink this, they got very sick.
Yes, he did get very sick.
In fact, Kirby almost died.
Yes, that's true.
Now, Ms. Martini, I'd like to talk about your relationship with Genesis further. Your Honor, may I share my screen for Exhibit 24? It has not been previously admitted to evidence. This is just for the judge.
You may.
Now, Ms. Martini, do you recognize this?
Yes, I do.
And this is the letter that you wrote to Genesis. Am I correct?
It is.
It is fair and accurate?
Yes.
Has it been altered in any way since you last wrote it?
No, it's not.
Your Honor, the plaintiff moves Exhibit 24 into evidence.
Any objection?
No, Your Honor.
All right, it is so admitted. Would you like to share it with the jury at this time?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, it is shared with the jury.
Now, Miss Martini, the wedding rehearsal where Genesis had drank that Cara wine was on June 7th, correct?
Yes, it was.
Now, in this letter, you say to leave Casey in the enclosed $300,000 is yours, right?
I did. Yes, I did.
We've lost you, Ms. Quinlivan. Yes.
Yeah, sorry. Can you hear me now? You can? Okay. I'll re-ask the question. Miss Martini, in this letter, you tell Genesis to leave Casey, right?
Yes, I did.
And you even enclosed $300,000.
I did, and she accepted the money.
She accepted the money, but she didn't leave Casey, did she?
No, she did not.
And you even wrote in this letter that if she didn't take the $3,000, you would take her out of the picture the hard way.
Yes.
And then you mentioned that she had a choice until the 7th.
Yes, because on the 7th, that was the last day we had to notify our guests that the wedding rehearsal was off.
But also on the 7th was when Genesis went to the hospital and died.
Yes.
Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions at this time.
Any redirect?
Yes, Your Honor, briefly. Now, Mrs. Martini, I want to ask you a little bit about the letter that was brought up on cross. Can you tell us what you meant by this letter?
Yes, so June 7th was the last day we had to notify our guests that the wedding rehearsal would be off. So I needed to know whether or not by then, whether Genesis would be taking my offer and leave Casey.
Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions.
Any recross on that point, Ms. Quinlivan?
No, Your Honor.
All right, thank you for your testimony today, Ms. Martini. Does the defense have another witness to call?
Yes, at this time, the defense would like to call Dr. Rachel Cannon to the stand.
All right, welcome, Dr. Cannon. Defense, you have the floor.
Good morning. Please introduce yourself to the court.
Hello, my name is Dr. Rachel Cannon.
And what do you do for a living?
Currently, I am an associate consultant for Gardner Consulting, where I specialize in matters of medicine, pharmacology, and toxicology. I also act as the current president for the Society of Professional Toxicologists.
What credentials do you have to hold those positions?
I first got my bachelor's in chemistry in 1990, and then I went on to get my MD with a toxicology concentration from Harvard, where I actually graduated summa cum laude. After that, I went on to be an ER doc at Massachusetts General Hospital and eventually director of toxicology before retiring and moving here to Midlands.
And how are you involved in today's case?
I was called in by the defense counsel to analyze the report and conclusions of Dr. Jimin Kwan, the treating physician for Genesis Petrillo, as well as come to my own conclusions regarding the nature of her death.
What materials have you reviewed in preparation for the trial today?
I reviewed the report of Dr. Kwan and the affidavit of Angel Rodriguez, as well as numerous exhibits, and all of this was more than sufficient for me to come to conclusions for today.
What methods do you use to actually come to those conclusions?
I use a method that we in the field call contact tracing.
Were those methods reliable?
Absolutely. Every
And
time
did you reliably apply that method to this case?
Yes, just as I would in any other case.
You mentioned earlier that you reviewed Dr. Kwan's report in preparation for today's trial. What is your opinion of his conclusions?
While I found Dr. Kwan's treatment of Petrillo to be reliable, his conclusions are ultimately not scientifically sound.
And why so?
Dr. Kwan immediately assumes that Genesis Petrillo's cause of death was respiratory arrest due to pesticide poisoning, specifically organophosphate pesticides that had been mixed in with wine. While I do agree that Genesis's cause of death was pesticide poisoning, I cannot agree with the definitive conclusion that it was mixed with wine.
So, if the pesticide didn't come from the wine, then where could they have come from?
Pesticides like this, especially organophosphates, can be picked up from a number of locations. Pesticides that are sprayed and linger in the air could be inhaled. If they're left on any food that hasn't been washed properly, they could be ingested, or they could be picked up through skin contact by touching an unclean surface.
And can you tell the jury about how you came to this conclusion?
Actually, I can show the jury. I prepared a chart in preparation for today's trial to help the jury understand my method and my findings.
Your Honor, permission for the witness to use a demonstrative aid?
Mr. Johnson, have you seen this aid?
I have not.
All right, so let's go ahead and share it with just the jury and opposing, not the jury, but just the judge and opposing counsel. And then I'll hear if Mr. Johnson has any objections before it's shared with the jury.
All right, of course. Co-counselor, can you pull it up? Okay.
Okay, Mr. Johnson, do you have any objections to this being shared with the jury at this time?
May I have just 1 second to review it, Your Honor?
You may.
Your Honor, I have no objection with this being shared to the jury.
All right, it is shared. And Mr. Cathari, you may continue.
Dr. Cannon, can you explain to the jury what's going on in this diagram?
Yes, this is a diagram that details the contact tracing method. We start with the big orange circle, which is the condition that Genesis had, respiratory arrest due to organophosphate poisoning. And then we divide that into the 3 main ways that Genesis could have picked up this pesticide, followed by all of the different places that Genesis could have come into contact with the pesticide.
You mentioned that Petrillo likely ingested this pesticide, leading to his death. Could you elaborate on that a little bit further?
Absolutely. If Petrillo had inhaled the pesticide, there would be pesticide found in their nasal cavity and other airways when the tissues were tested, and there was no pesticide found. If they had absorbed it through skin contact, there would be burns on their skin, which weren't found either. Further, when Petrillo's stomach contents was tested, it did test positive for organophosphate pesticide, so it is most likely that she ingested it.
So where could Petrillo have actually ingested this pesticide from?
The most likely culprit here is unwashed produce. Pesticides like organophosphates are very common in Midlands, and farmers use them to keep pests off their produce while it's growing. I understand that there was a salad bar there the night of the rehearsal dinner, so if there was any produce in that salad bar that hadn't been washed properly, it's possible that Genesis could have eaten something contaminated and been poisoned that way. But that's not the only produce that might not have been washed properly.
So what produce could this pesticide have actually come from?
When it comes to pesticide poisoning cases like this one, it's often forgotten that there was a grown produce used to... Your Honor, are you good? You disconnected there for a second.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, the last thing I heard you say was something about pesticide poisoning, and then it... Sorry.
When it comes to pesticide poisoning cases, it's often forgotten that there is a produce grown to make alcoholic beverages. In my time as an ER doctor, I treated numerous pesticide cases where it was initially thought to be alcohol poisoning, but was actually pesticide poisoning by some barley that was used to make beer or grapes that were used to make wine that were contaminated. In the case of Genesis Petrillo, it's entirely possible that the grapes used to make the wine she drank were contaminated, and so when the wine itself was made, the pesticide was already there.
And are there any other places?
Objection, Your Honor. May I be heard?
You may.
As already discussed, if the wine was poisoned before it was produced, that's negligence. We've already shown that that's not relevant to today's case.
May I be heard, Your Honor?
Very briefly.
Well, Your Honor, what we're trying to show is that there could have been pesticides that have been placed on the wine. It's not necessarily Peony Estates, or it's not necessarily Peony Estates' fault, which it would be in the negligence case. We're trying to say that this pesticide could have come from anywhere.
Okay, Mr. Johnson, I understand your objection. I'm going to overrule it at this moment, and we'll have it as part of the standing objection to any testimony from the defense about the pesticide issue at Peony Estates that can be raised on appeal.
Yes, Your Honor.
All right. So are there any other places that Petrillo could have ingested this pesticide from?
It's entirely possible that Petrillo ate something else that was contaminated with pesticide, but it would be difficult to tell. When your stomach begins the digestive process, any food bits you have are dissolved into the liquids in your stomach and are all churned together. So it's possible that Petrillo could have eaten something else contaminated, and then it dissolved into the wine that was already in their stomach and churned all together to make the wine look contaminated.
So, Dr. Cannon, ultimately, what was your conclusion in today's case?
Genesis Petrillo passed away due to respiratory arrest from organophosphate pesticide poisoning. While Dr. Kwan concludes that this was pesticide that was mixed with wine before Genesis drank it, it's entirely possible that this pesticide could have been on any number of surfaces, from the salad bar to the grapes before the wine was even made. And so it cannot be definitively ruled that the pesticide came from being mixed with wine.
Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions.
Any cross from the plaintiff?
Yes, Your Honor.
Floor is yours.
Good afternoon, Dr. Cannon.
Good afternoon.
Before I begin, I'd like to verify that you can see and hear me clearly.
Yes, I can.
Should that change at any point, please let me know right away.
Of course.
Thank you. Now, Doctor, before we begin to talk about your conclusions, I'd like to talk about you just a little bit. Now, you work for Gardner Consulting, that's correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And one of Gardner's biggest clients is Detsky Roach and Rodent Killer, that's correct?
Yes.
Now, Detsky Roach and Rodent Killer produces, as their name would suggest, chemicals that kill rodents and roaches, right?
Absolutely.
Now, before this case, you received a call from the CEO of Detsky Roach and Rodent Killer, that's correct?
I did.
And in this call, he told you that it was very important that pesticides not be found the cause of Genesis Petrillo's death. That's correct.
Yes, that's
Objection,
correct.
Your Honor, that's calling for hearsay.
Response?
Yes, hearsay is an out-of-court statement offered to prove the truth of the matter asserted. The truth of the matter asserted that Genesis died from pesticides is not in question here. I'm entering this statement to show bias in the witness. As such, it is not hearsay.
Can you repeat the question again so I can make sure I heard it properly?
The question that I posed to the witness?
Yes.
The CEO of Detsky Roach and Rodent Killer told you that it was important that pesticides not be found the cause of Genesis Petrillo's death. That's correct.
All right, your response, Mr. Cathari.
Well, Your Honor, as a result of that call, it's essentially he's trying to use it to prove the truth of the matter asserted later on in the case, because even then through this statement, which was made out of court, we can't really no, Your Honor, I don't have a response. Sorry.
Okay.
Is a response necessary from me, Your Honor?
No, Mr. Johnson, I'm going to overrule the objection, but I will give a limiting instruction to the jury that this statement is, if there is any truth value in the statement at all, it should not be taken as such.
Yes, Your Honor. Okay, I'll re-ask the question, Dr. Cannon. The CEO of Detsky Roach and Rodent Killer called you before this, that's correct?
Yes, that's right.
And his statement to you was, in fact, it is very important that pesticides not be found the cause of Genesis Petrillo's death. That's correct.
Yes, that's true.
Doctor, now I'd like to talk about your conclusions. One conclusion that you stated today was that it was possible that Genesis was poisoned by pesticides from something other than Harper Martini's wine. That's correct?
Yes, pesticides like organophosphates can be left on a number of surfaces.
Well, if Genesis had directly ingested a pesticide, it likely would have burned her throat and esophagus. That's correct?
Absolutely. That's why I said it's most likely she ingested contaminated produce.
So you would agree with me that direct ingestion is highly unlikely?
Yes.
And Doctor, you're aware that the stomach contents of Genesis Petrillo were tested?
Yes, and they did test positive for pesticides.
You're aware that it was the wine that tested positive?
Yes, but like I was saying earlier, if there were any other food sources that were contaminated, it would have been dissolved into the wine and made the wine appear contaminated. There's no way of knowing for sure.
But you would agree that if food was contaminated, everyone who ate that food would be poisoned?
That's
correct?
likely, yes.
And everyone who ate that food would suffer the effects of pesticide poisoning. That's correct?
Yes, just as if everybody drank that wine, they would suffer the effects if it was mixed with the wine.
And you're aware that no one else tested positive for organophosphate poisoning from
Yes.
the wedding party. That's correct?
Yes, that's correct.
So you would agree with me that this is not as likely as the wine poisoning Genesis Petrillo?
No, of the other food sources poisoning Genesis Petrillo is less likely than having the pesticides in the wine. Most likely that the grapes were contaminated when the wine was made.
So you would agree with me in saying that the most likely cause of Genesis Petrillo's poisoning was the wine produced by Harper Martini. That's correct?
Yes, like I just said, the grapes when the wine was made would make the wine contaminated.
Objection, Your Honor. I move that be stricken from the record as that goes to the wine being produced instead of Harper poisoning. As we've already shown, that is a negligence, not a battery defense.
What was your question to the witness? I'm sorry, if you could just repeat that again.
I asked if Harper Martini's wine was the most likely cause of the poisoning of Genesis Petrillo, in her medical opinion.
Okay, I will strike the response from the witness and ask.
Your Honor.
Yeah, go ahead, Mr. Cathari.
Sorry about that. She's simply just talking about the grapes having the pesticides on before. It's not talking anything about negligence or any about that. It's just saying all her expert opinion testimony is saying is that the grapes had the pesticide on it previously.
Yeah, I understand that, and that testimony is already on the record. So I'm going to, considering the interesting situation that we're in here, I'm not going to strike all of that testimony from the record. I'm only going to strike her answer to Mr. Johnson's question. We'll allow Mr. Johnson to ask the question again and ask that the witness simply answer the question and not expound on anything that was not in Mr. Johnson's question. And Mr. Cathari, if this is something that you'd like to bring up on redirect, I will allow that to happen.
Yes, Your Honor. Okay, Dr. Cannon, I apologize. I'll ask you the question again. You would agree with me when I say that Harper Martini's wine is the most likely cause of the poison that entered Genesis Petrillo's system?
Yes.
No further questions.
Redirect, Mr. Cathari.
Yes, Your Honor. So, Dr. Cannon, based on your expert opinion, where was the most likely source of this pesticide getting into the wine?
As I mentioned previously, the most likely source of the pesticide was unwashed produce, specifically the grapes that were used to make the wine or any of the produce in the salad.
Objection, Your Honor. We've now raised this objection, or I'm sorry, may I be heard?
Is this going to be an objection to relevance due to the issues with the negligence?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, I am noting your continued objection to this, and it is overruled at this time.
Yes, Your Honor.
Would you like me to re-ask the question?
Go ahead.
All right. So based on your expert opinion, Dr. Cannon, what is the most likely source of pesticide in the wine?
The most likely source of pesticide that caused Genesis Petrillo's death was contaminated produce, either from the salad bar or potentially from the grapes used to make the wine.
Thank you. No further questions.
Any recross on that, Mr. Johnson? Do you have any recross, Mr. Johnson?
No, Your Honor. Sorry about the delay.
That's all right. Thank you, Dr. Cannon. You are excused.
Thank you.
Does the defense have any further witnesses?
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, the defense called Ms. Sam Arnold to the stand.
All right, Ms. Arnold, you have been sworn. Defense, you have the floor.
Please introduce yourself to the court.
Hello, my name is Samantha Arnold, but everybody at the kitchen just calls me Sam.
What do you do for a living?
Well, I'm a trained chef. Although my dream was to open up a restaurant, I've put that aside for right now. And I currently own a catering service where I'm the executive chef.
And what kind of events do you usually serve?
Well, we do all kinds of events, bar mitzvahs, quinceañeras, weddings. We especially love weddings because they typically bring in the most profit for us.
Well, I actually want to talk to you about one of the weddings you were supposed to serve, specifically the wedding of Genesis Petrillo and Casey Soto. How did you first get involved with that wedding in particular?
Well, I was actually hired by the groom's mother, Harper Martini, who I've worked pretty closely with in the past at her winery, Peony Estates. She contacted me in November of 2018, asking me to do the catering for the wedding.
And how did things progress from there with the planning?
Well, I'm a very detailed-oriented person, and when it comes to weddings specifically, I have a pretty strict schedule about when to get things done. So the first thing I do is plan to meet with whoever hired me about the menu, and so I met with Miss Martini in late November.
Can you tell us about this meeting?
Well, sure. To say the least, it was pretty disappointing because it turns out I didn't even need to meet with Harper because she actually hired a wedding planner who I should have met with in the first place. However, it was also less than ideal because there were pesticides in the Peony Estates kitchen.
You mentioned pesticides. Can you tell us more about those pesticides in the kitchen?
Yeah, so when I first got to the winery that day, I saw Harper carrying a canister of pesticides, the Bug Off brand. And when we walked into the kitchen, she just threw it in the corner. After that, she put it into the bottling area where the wine's made.
And after this initial meeting, what else did you have to do in regards to planning?
Well, like I said, Ms. Martini had a wedding planner, so I scheduled a time to meet with her instead so that we could have a set in stone date for the tasting event, since I wanted to make sure that everyone was going to be pleased with the food that we were serving.
And was there anything else that was discussed at your meeting with the wedding planner?
Yeah, the wedding planner, Blair, she had informed me that she was a little concerned about Mrs. Martini's relationship with Genesis getting in the way of the wedding, but I wasn't too concerned, so I just went on with planning the tasting event.
So let's talk about the tasting event. When was that?
That was February 8th of 2019.
And what happened at that event?
Well, of course, everyone loved the food because I'm an excellent chef. But I also remember being very surprised about the Peony Estates kitchen because it was actually clean for the first time.
And why was that weird?
Well, because the last time I was there was just pesticides lying around. I quickly learned that they only cleaned up because the FDA was coming for an inspection. All I know is I always keep my kitchen clean.
Now, I want to talk to you about the rehearsal dinner on June 7th. What can you tell us about that morning?
So around 11 a.m., I went to the winery. And of course, the kitchen was in disarray and it was chaotic. I almost had a panic attack. But to make matters worse, there was pesticide on the counter in the kitchen where the bottle of Carl wine was.
Now, you mentioned Carl wine. What can you tell us about that?
Well, while I was in the kitchen, Mrs. Martini asked me to give Genesis the bottle of Carl wine during her toast at the rehearsal dinner. I thought that this was pretty nice, so I agreed to do it, but I was a little concerned that it was so close to that pesticide.
Now, let's talk about the actual rehearsal dinner. How was that evening?
Well, I mean, the food was amazing, if you're asking about that. The salad bar was a great hit because, again, I'm a trained chef, and that's just what I do. But I was pleased with the reaction to the food, and I gave Genesis the bottle of wine just like Miss Martini asked me. And then at around 10:15, I was done for the night, so I got ready to plan for the next day, which was the actual wedding day.
And what happened that next day?
Well, as I'm sure you know, the wedding actually didn't happen. Genesis had died that morning, and it was just heartbreaking.
And what, if anything, do you know about Mr. Petrio's passing?
I don't know too much about it. All I remember thinking after they told me that she had passed away was thinking, I hope it wasn't something that she ate or drank, especially that bottle of wine.
Thank you. No further questions.
Cross,
Yes, Your Honor.
you have the floor.
Good morning, Miss Arnold. Can you see and hear me all right?
I can, yes.
And if that changes at any time, please be sure to let me know.
Absolutely.
So you met the defendant in 2016, just months before the wedding, right?
That's true. Well, no, actually in 2016, that was 3 years before the wedding.
Yes, my apologies. 3 years before the wedding, right?
Yes.
And Peony Estates is your biggest client, correct?
Yes, it is.
And the defendant and her business, of course, led you out of bankruptcy, didn't it? Correct?
They really helped me out. Yeah, it was a great starting point for me.
Now let's talk about your cooking. You catered the wedding, correct?
I did.
And no one else got sick from eating your food, more specifically, the salad bar or the produce made for the rehearsal dinner, correct?
As far as I know.
And no one else got sick from the wine served, correct?
The wine I served?
Your Honor, My
Yes.
witness would have special knowledge to everyone that was there. She has no knowledge of, like, if anyone else had gotten sick. There's no way she could possibly know that.
Response, Ms. Scott?
Yes, Your Honor. Pursuant to 701, I'm only asking for Ms. Arnold's rationally based perception as to whether or not she was informed of anyone being sick from the salad bar or the produce that she cooked for the rehearsal dinner.
May I respond?
Very briefly.
The question was not, were you informed? The question was, did anybody else get sick? And she has no knowledge of whether or not that was the case.
All right, I'm going to allow the question, and if the witness doesn't know, she can answer just as she doesn't know, and if she does know, she can let us know what information, if any, that she has. So overruled.
Yes, Your Honor. May I rephrase the question?
I overruled the objection. Do with that what you wish.
Yes, Your Honor. Well, let's move on. Now let's talk about what the defendant told you about Genesis leading up to the rehearsal dinner.
Okay.
All the defendant could talk about was Genesis Petrillo, right?
At what point are you referring to?
Just throughout the wedding experience, did the defendant consistently bring up Genesis Petrillo?
When we met to make the menu for the wedding, I remember her bringing her up a couple of times.
And the defendant would mention how Genesis was selfish and immature, correct?
Yeah, she did say that.
Now you, Miss Arnold, seen how visibly upset the defendant got when talking about Genesis, right?
She seemed a little peeved.
In fact, there was one incident in the kitchen when the defendant screamed, "Anyone but Genesis," literally anyone. Those were the defendant's words, right?
I had no idea what she was talking about, though.
Now let's discuss the December meeting you had with Blair Osborne and the defendant. You knew Genesis was planning to take Casey across the world and to Paris, right?
I had learned that they were planning on doing a destination wedding, or that that's what they wanted in Paris, which I thought was a great idea.
Now, you seen that this visibly made the defendant upset, correct?
Yeah, she seemed a little sad that her kid was going to be so far away from her.
The defendant even told you that everything would be much easier and so much better if Genesis wasn't around, right?
They butted head quite a bit. So yeah, she did say that.
And one day, now let's talk about the 2019 bottle of Carl wine the defendant prepared for Genesis. The defendant told you this bottle was for Genesis, correct?
Yes, she did.
The defendant told you Genesis was getting something special that would take care of their problems forever, correct? Those were the defendant's words?
Yeah, I thought it was to make amends.
But as you were leaving the kitchen, you noticed a bottle of pesticide, right?
Yeah, it was just sitting there on the counter near the wine.
Before this, though, you told the defendant that the kitchen was no place for pesticides, correct?
Yes, and then she took it into the bottling area where all the wine was.
And when you asked the defendant why it was there, the defendant said to kill pests like Genesis, but she tried to cover it up with a joke, correct?
Well, it was a joke.
But she did say to kill pests like Genesis, correct?
Yeah, we were both laughing about it.
And now, Miss Arnold, this is all you know, correct?
About what?
You went back to the kitchen, right?
Yes, I did.
And you were not with the defendant before she presented it to Genesis, right?
Well, I presented it to Genesis.
But you didn't see, okay, you presented it to Genesis. And before you presented this to Genesis, you heard Genesis yell outside, correct?
I heard Genesis yell outside?
Yes, you heard Genesis yell.
Okay, plaintiff's out of time.
Yes, Your Honor. Your Honor, if I may, I still have the plaintiff as having at least 20 seconds left for cross. So I believe there is a time dispute here.
Okay, are you guys all right with me splitting it down the middle and giving the plaintiff 10 seconds to wrap up their cross?
Yes, Your Honor.
The defense is okay with that?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right.
Miss Arnold, you heard Genesis yell, "You think you know what's best for Casey, but
Objection,
you..."
Your Honor, to the hearsay statements of Genesis Petrillo.
May I respond, Your Honor?
Yes.
This is not hearsay, for it's not offered for the truth of the matter asserted. Rather, it's probative on subsequent action pursuant to 407 that this interaction with Genesis may have led the statements by the defendant to be less likely of a joke. Therefore, not hearsay and probative on subsequent action.
Okay, very briefly, Ms. Wassell, because I believe that we're getting close to all loss.
Subsequent action means action afterwards. If she's using this for the truth, like if she's using this to prove that it wasn't a joke that happened before, that's not subsequent action. And it's being used for the truth of the matter asserted.
Okay, I'm going to sustain the objection.
Motion to strike that line of questioning.
Oh. Shit. What just happened? Can you guys still hear me?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, my screen went black. Oh, there we go. Okay, I'm back. Motion to strike is granted.
Yes, Your Honor.
And Miss Arnold, you did not see the defendant with the bottle of Carl wine before you presented it to the defendant, correct?
Yes, I did.
Correct?
Yes, I did. She gave it to me to give to Genesis.
All right, no further questions, Your Honor.
Any brief redirect on those points, Ms. Massell?
No redirect, Your Honor. I just asked that my witness be able to step down.
All right, thank you for your time today, Ms. Arnold. You are excused. Any further evidence from the defense?
No, Your Honor. The defense rests its case.
It's my understanding that we have about 10 minutes left until all loss. Is that correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, so I know that they're going to allow us to be a little bit flexible with that. So what I'm going to do, is it okay for plaintiff and defense if we do not take a break right now and go straight into closings? If you want, I can give you 60 seconds.
I'm all right going straight into closings, Your Honor.
The defense
Yes,
as
please.
well.
Thank you.
Okay, so the plaintiff, you have the floor.
Now, Your Honor, can you see and hear me okay?
I can only see your head, but if you're okay with that, then I'm okay with that.
I don't know how much lower I can get this. See me a little better?
Yes. But you frozen.
Okay. May it please of this love for her daughter knew no bounds, and that is why the defendant would do anything for her daughter, even if it meant taking out Genesis the hard way. Now, as the plaintiff, we hold the burden of proof in today's case. We have to prove to you by a preponderance of the evidence that Harper Martini intentionally poisoned Genesis Petrillo to cause harm, and that the poison caused Genesis Petrillo's death. Now, I would like to discuss these two elements specifically, so when you go back into the deliberation room, you will be confident that Harper Martini was liable for Genesis Petrillo's death. First, we know that the poison, specifically organophosphate poison, caused Genesis Petrillo's death. Now, this is a fact that has not been disputed in today's trial. Both expert witnesses have testified that organophosphate pesticides contained in the wine were the most likely cause of Genesis Petrillo's death. Second, the defendant intentionally poisoned Genesis Petrillo to cause harm, meaning the defendant acted with substantial knowledge that the result of death would occur. I'd like to talk about two elements that fall under this next prong. The first is motive, and the second is intentional harmful contact that the defendant had to act with substantial certainty that death could result. First, talking about motive. The defendant hated Genesis Petrillo. Genesis constantly made rude remarks towards the defendant, even insulting the defendant's winery, which was one of the most important things in the defendant's life. The other important thing that I would like to discuss in the defendant's life was her daughter, Casey, because a mother's love knows no bounds. The defendant loved her daughter, Casey, and was afraid that Genesis Petrillo would ruin this relationship. On multiple occasions, the defendant went and called out Genesis Petrillo, calling Genesis a seller pest, wanting to buy Genesis pesticide from Amazon in an email to Danny Francasio, and made so many jokes about Genesis that were concerning. The defendant hated Genesis. The defendant even offered a napkin, a letter on a napkin, and on this napkin told Genesis that she would offer her $300,000, a huge sum of money, just so Genesis would leave her and her daughter alone. But Genesis didn't take this money. Well, Genesis did take the money, but didn't leave. And that is when the defendant decided that she would take Genesis out the hard way, giving her to June 7th to decide. June 7th was the day that Harper Martini gave Genesis Petrillo the bottle of wine, and that was also the day that Genesis got poisoned and died. Now, I'd like to talk about the intent for harmful contact, that the defendant acted with a substantial certainty that death would result. First, we know that organophosphate would kill someone even in small amounts, and the defendant knew that too, because the defendant received an email from Danny Francasio, and in this email, Danny Francasio told the defendant that pesticides could be dangerous and that even in small amounts, they could seriously hurt and even kill someone. Not only this, but the defendant saw one of their own employees get harmed by pesticides. Kirby Doolittle tasted pesticide in an open wine glass that was left out during spraying and got severely sick and almost died. The defendant even testified to the situation, not even knowing that there were pesticides in the wine besides witnessing the spray. When she smelled the wine, she couldn't smell any pesticides. And when she looked at the wine, she couldn't see any pesticides. The defendant knew that if you put pesticides in a wine, you could not see or smell them. Now, the defendant in today's trial indeed was liable for battery because she had the motive and she had the intent for harmful contact by giving Genesis the bottle of Caro wine. That is why you will find Harper Martini liable for battery. Thank you.
Thank you. Defense, you have the floor.
Yes, Your Honor. Give me 1 second. Accidents happen. Your wedding day is supposed to be the most happiest, most memorable night of your entire life. And unfortunately for the family of Casey Soto, Genesis Petrillo, and Miss Harper Martini, that night never occurred. Despite the best of intentions from Miss Harper Martini, who simply wanted her only most beloved child to be happy in life, unfortunately, tragedy struck, ripping her only child away from her future tragic lover. Accidents happen, and regardless of what the plaintiff tells you, as tragic as it was, those events that occurred on the night of June 7th of 2019 were nothing more than an accident that could have happened to anyone or anything. Members of the jury, we are here today because the plaintiff wrongfully accuses our client, Miss Harper Martini, of battery in the death of her loving child's former spouse, Miss Genesis Petrillo. Now, as a defense, we bear no burden of proof in today's case. The plaintiff must prove that our client, Miss Harper Martini, committed battery based on the preponderance of evidence on 3 major prongs. First, they must prove that Miss Martini actually committed the crime. Second, they must prove Miss Martini had intent to commit the crime. And third and finally, they must prove that Genesis Petrillo died as a result of Miss Martini's actions. Now let's go through each of these prongs one by one and show to you how the plaintiff hasn't met their burden of proof in today's case. Let's start with Ms. Martini committing the action. In order to actually prove this point, the plaintiff has made this elaborate story, this grand conspiracy that Ms. Martini was just simply holding a canister of pesticide on that day, conspired and put this pesticide in the bottle of wine, causing Genesis Petrillo to get sick and die. But don't buy any of that fancy rhetoric, because throughout the entirety of this entire trial, not a single one of their witnesses or testimonies has actually saw Ms. Martini actually directly doing it. The closest they got into this is through the testimony of Angel Rodriguez. However, Ms. Angel Rodriguez's testimony falls apart in cross-examination when she herself admits that yes, although she saw Ms. Martini holding a canister of pesticide that day, she didn't see her anywhere near the bottle of wine, nor did she see her putting the pesticide in it. Moreover, given how Ms. Martini's job was as the administrator of Peony Estates, it was simply within her job to be holding a canister of pesticides in the first place. And again, Your Honor, based on the preponderance of evidence, which is more likely than not, given how the plaintiff doesn't have a single piece of evidence showing Ms. Martini putting it inside the wine, ultimately they haven't met their burden of proof in this regard. Which leads us to the second major point, intent. According to the case law based on Eden v. Pardet, which we established in a pretrial, in order to prove intent, they must be able to do it through two ways. First, they must prove that Ms. Martini acted knowingly, knowing that Petrillo would die as a result, or Ms. Martini knew that the pesticide was in the wine and that Petrillo would die eventually. And in order to do so, again, they concocted this scary grand story. They tried to paint this deep, dark, divine conflict between Genesis Petrillo and Harper Martini. But the fact of the matter is, that never existed. Because like we saw from Angel Rodriguez, one of their very own witnesses, sure, Harper Martini and Genesis Petrillo had a very deep dislike of each other, but it wasn't this hatred like they like to say. Moreover, pretty much every single mother-in-law in the country and the world doesn't like their child's spouse. Ms. Martini wasn't any different. Through the testimony of Harper Martini, we herself saw that yes, she disagreed with what Genesis Petrillo did, but she only wanted what was best for her child and wanted her only child to be happy. She went as far as to pay for the vast majority of their wedding and devoted hundreds of hours in planning it. Is that something you would do for someone you had a deep, deep hatred of? I think not. Lastly, the plaintiff in this regard, they're corroborating dislike with murder. I don't like the guy who sits behind me in calculus class. I'm not going to murder them. The plaintiff hasn't met the burden of proof, the preponderance of evidence that this actually led to murder. But Your Honor, we're not here because of intent. We are here simply because of carelessness. As we saw through the testimony of the chef within Peony Estates that very same day, there were pesticides around and he saw a pattern of pesticide use in the past. Moreover, through the testimony of Genesis Petrillo, we saw that one time in the past, Mr. Doolittle, who consumed that wine that was near a can of pesticide, he took one sip and became gravely ill. Imagine what would happen to Genesis Petrillo drinking an entire bottle. Their own witness, Danny Francasio, in cross-examination agreed with us. He agreed that Miss Martini in the past had contacted him about pesticide problems relating to their farm. Again, showing a long line of carelessness that doesn't show deep, dark intent. And again, based on the preponderance of evidence, the plaintiff hasn't been able to substantially prove that Miss Martini had this deep, dark hatred, nor have they been able to substantially prove that it wasn't a result of this carelessness. Which leads us to the third prong. The third prong, essentially, that Petrillo died as a result of Miss Martini's actions. And to do so, they've tried to use the testimony of Dr. Kwan, who said that organophosphate poisoning was likely the major cause. But in cross-examination, Dr. Kwan has major problems with his testimony as well. He himself admits that he doesn't know where this pesticide could have come from, the amounts of pesticide that were there, and even admitted that other factors could be major indicators and could influence those indicators that he said there were. However, through our very own Dr. Cannon's testimony, we saw that a likely cause of this pesticide could have been from the pesticide sprayed on the grapes as a result of these patterns. And moreover, given this past history, based on the preponderance of evidence, it's more likely than not, there may have been some accidents that may have actually happened. Your Honor, again, based on the preponderance of evidence, they haven't been able to substantially prove that it was pesticide that was added after that wine was made and not before. Even if you don't buy any of that, remember, their witnesses, every single one of them has major flaws. Angel Rodriguez herself, she admits that she blames Harper Martini for the death of Genesis Petrillo, showing that she's not an objective witness. Dr. Kwan, he himself says that he wished to use his testimony to stop pesticide use in the government. Again, he has an ulterior motive. And Danny Francasio, she's the owner of a competitive winery. She wants to see Harper Martini fail. Your Honor, stepping back, accidents happen. And we understand in the death of Genesis Petrillo the need to rush for judgment and find out what truly happened. However, that doesn't mean we should abandon requests for justice. We owe it to the victim and to the accused to find out what truly happened on that fateful night. The plaintiff likes to say, a mother's love knows no bounds. And we completely agree. And because a mother's love knows no bounds, as we saw through the testimony of Harper Martini, and as Casey Soto was feeling, ultimately, we have to realize and we have to stop putting this family through this abuse. We have to realize and we have to move on. And as the plaintiff hasn't met their burden of proof based on the preponderance of evidence, we ask you to find Harper Martini not liable of battering the death of Genesis Petrillo. Thank you.
Do we have any time left for a plaintiff rebuttal? Any time left for a plaintiff rebuttal?
I believe I have time on the clock. I just don't know when all loss.
We have 2 minutes and 30 seconds left for plaintiff rebuttal, but all loss has passed.
Okay. I apologize to the plaintiff. We will not be hearing a rebuttal today due to that. However, that will not negatively impact your score.
Yes, Your Honor.
Oh, Tab says it's okay if we finish. Okay, so it looks like our other judge has reached out to Tab and they said it's okay if we finish up real quick. Is that right, Grace?
Yes, that's correct. They said we just need to finish anytime between 12:50 and 1.
Okay, we can do that. Plaintiff, if you would like to have your rebuttal time, you may use that now. You have the floor.
Your Honor, at the beginning, plaintiff did not ask to reserve remaining time for a rebuttal.
It is my understanding that in the in Midlands, that is not necessary. Is that correct?
That is correct, Your Honor.
Okay.
Can you hear and see me okay? A mother's love knows no bounds. That is why the defendant took the necessary precautions to keep her daughter, Casey, with her, so she could stay with Casey for the rest of their lives. Now, the defense came up in front of you and are claiming that this is a mere accident, but members of the jury, we know that this is not accidental. We've agreed that this is not accidental because we've agreed that she was not negligent. Miss Martini knew how to prepare grapes correctly and put them in wine. She had been working in the business for over 20 years. She knows how to do this, so this could not have been accidental. It had to be intentional. And if Miss Martini had the motive to be intentional. Miss Martini was about to have her daughter taken away from her by Genesis Petrillo, the only family she had left. She referred to Genesis as a pest on multiple occasions, and she even said that she would take Genesis out the hard way. Miss Martini intentionally put that pesticide in the wine to take Genesis out the hard way. And that is why we're confident you will be able to find Harper Martini liable for battery. Thank you.
Thank you. Grace, do you need any time to finish filling out your ballot?
No, I finished.
Okay. Let's see. Yes. We've got to type all these things in. Ballot has been submitted. All right. Grace, if you want to turn your camera on. All right, everybody. Real quick, because I know you guys have another round and this one went a little bit long. My name is Ashley DeMuzio. I am a criminal defense attorney here in Forsyth County. I am a Wake Law School alum. I did trial team through high school, college, and through law school as well. And I'm currently an assistant coach for the Wake Forest Law School trial teams. So I really enjoy this stuff, and I really enjoyed this round. I have a couple overarching questions, not questions, comments. I did type out most of my comments individually for you guys, so you will get those. I type a lot faster than I write, so I was able to get some significant stuff down. I just had 2 comments that I wanted to make overall, and then I'll pass it on to Grace. First, both teams need to get better with their objections. You guys need to know the objection responses. There was a couple times, the one I'm going to pull out because it's highlighted in my brain the most was between Mr. Johnson and Mr. Kathari on Dr. Kwan's testimony. The hearsay objection that Mr. Kathari made was a good objection, but Mr. Johnson, there is a exception for statements made in the course of medical treatment and diagnosis, and that was the appropriate exception for you to offer, and then that would have been allowed in. There were several other moments throughout the trial where just a better knowledge of the rules of evidence would have given both teams what they wanted. But because I was missing that response from you guys, I decided to sustain some objections. So just review the Midlands rules of evidence and be aware of those. They're your best friend. As somebody who does bench trials before COVID hit several times a month and having to deal with evidentiary objections pretty much all the time in my job, the person who knows the rules of evidence better is the one who's most likely going to win, because you are the one controlling what is and it does not come into evidence. So it's very important, especially if you guys want to become attorneys later on. Second, that has to do with the pretrial order and the defense's theory. That was a very interesting way of approaching it, defense, and the pretrial order makes that a little difficult. For the plaintiff, I would have, the moment that they start going towards that, and you know it because it's in their opening, right? The moment a team starts going towards that, you need to make an objection on the first witness so that we can have that whole argument out where I can hear from the defense why this isn't violating the pretrial order, and I can hear from the plaintiff why this is violating the pretrial order, and then make a ruling before the jury starts hearing stuff. The fact that that wasn't brought up to me until the end of the plaintiff's case in chief, when all 3 witnesses were crossed on those points, kind of locked my hands for me and forced me to allow you guys to, the defense to continue allowing that in, because at this point, the jury had already heard a lot of it, and making a ruling different from that would have led to some trouble, some issues, and probably would have required us to retry the case, since a lot of that was allowed in and then the objection was made way too late. So just plaintiff teams, if you want to argue against that, make sure that you're ready for it right off the bat. It's a very interesting approach, since the defense is essentially saying, we know that the judge already said that we weren't negligent, but today we are saying, well, we were negligent, it just wasn't battery. So it was very interesting. You might, and you're probably going to get rounds where if the plaintiff objects early enough, the judge will not allow that. So just be prepared for that. I think it's a very unique way of approaching this, but you're writing the line. So I would just be prepared with a very strong response. And when you are plaintiff and plaintiff teams, be prepared with really strong reasoning why that kind of thing should be kept out, because I have a feeling that we'll probably see that more than once. I'm going to go ahead and pass it to Grace now. If you guys have any individual questions for me, or just want to talk about law school or criminal law in general, shoot me a chat before you leave, and I will share my contact information with you.
Hey, everybody. Good job. I think one thing overall everyone can work on is cleaning up procedure, especially when admitting exhibits. Make sure you have that very clean so it doesn't get messy. And for crosses, make sure your questions are very, very short and very specific, or else witnesses will be able to wiggle out like you had trouble with them doing today. Other than that, yeah, work on objections. And that's my general comments. I filled out specific comments, so y'all will get those.
All right, you are released. Good luck with the last round.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.